To his friends and neighbors, Alex Skeel was a quiet, football-loving young man. No one expected that behind closed doors, Alex had endured a hell few could imagine. For years, he had been physically and mentally abused by his girlfriend, Jordan Worth. Doctors later said that he had been so exhausted that he was only about 10 days away from death. The case shocked Britain because it shattered the stereotype that only women are victims in violent relationships. Jordan Worth became the first woman in Britain to be convicted of controlling and coercing a partner. Before the case was exposed, Alex lived in the shadow of control, isolation, and prolonged abuse. A heartbreaking testament to how warped love can become a chain that kills a person from within. Alex's story is not only a journey to escape the line between life and death, but also a warning. Domestic violence comes in many different forms, and silence can be a death sentence for the victim. Born on 17 August 1995 in the small English village of Stewartby, Alex Skeel arrived into difficult circumstances. He and his twin brother Luke were premature. He weighed barely 1 kilogram and was immediately placed in intensive care. His first days were marked by surgery and uncertainty, but he survived and gradually grew stronger. As his health improved, Alex found joy and solace in football. For him, football was not just a hobby, but an escape, an activity that brought joy throughout his childhood, especially on weekends when all the pressures seemed to melt away on the field. Alex was outgoing and had many friends, but romantic relationships were not a priority for him. That changed at 16, shortly after finishing secondary school, when he met Jordan Worth. Jordan, born in April 1995, was known for quiet strength and compassion. From an early age, she volunteered at animal shelters and fundraised for children in Africa. She excelled at gymnastics, worked hard at her studies, and earned respect from teachers and peers for her kindness and dedication. Although shy around strangers, Jordan has the ability to connect deeply with others when she opens up. Her gentle, sincere personality attracted Alex the first time they met in June 2012, a presentation at a university introduced by a mutual friend. They immediately felt a connection. Jordan came from a loving family and planned to study fine art with a view to teaching. Her warmth and genuine interest made Alex feel understood in a new way. Their relationship developed quickly. Having a girlfriend was a novel, exhilarating experience for him, and he seemed genuinely happy. Jordan fitted in well with Alex's friends, but her relationship with his family was strained from the start. His mother, Geraldine, disliked Jordan, viewing her as difficult and critical, and as someone who didn't respect the family's way of life. Geraldine's disapproval was plain and created growing tension. By spring 2013, problems began to surface. During Jordan's 18th birthday trip to London, they went to see a musical, but when Alex went into the hotel bathroom for a while, Jordan disappeared. He searched for her for hours, panicking. When he finally found her in the hotel lobby, she appeared calm, smiling as if nothing had happened. This action worried Alex's family, and they thought Jordan was behaving abnormally, even showing signs of manipulation. But Alex, still young and in love, did not accept that view and defended Jordan. Believing that his parents misunderstood her, love blinded him to the warnings. That same year, at Alex and Luke's 18th birthday party, the relationship between Alex and Jordan continued to be strained. Among nearly 100 guests was the 15-year-old daughter of Geraldine's closest friend. In front of the assembled crowd, Jordan suddenly lashed out at the teenager, creating a shocking scene. Humiliated and angry, Geraldine asked Jordan to leave. Jordan refused, and the situation grew more heated. Alex, distraught and in tears, begged his mother to let Jordan stay. A close friend intervened. taking Alex to the bathroom to try to calm him and explain that Jordan's behavior was inappropriate. Alex, emotionally overwhelmed, could not accept it. Jordan eventually left the party, but the incident left a residue of conflict, and in the weeks that followed, their arguments became more frequent and volatile. The turning point came during a heated argument. Jordan broke Alex's SIM card. That moment was a wake-up call for Alex. The warnings from his family, the signs of stress and manipulation, suddenly became clear. He realized the relationship had become toxic and ended it for the sake of his own well-being. Convinced it was the right choice for both of them, a few months later, Jordan reappeared with unexpected news. She was pregnant. Alex stayed calm. He was willing to take responsibility as a father, but made it clear he did not want to resume the romantic relationship. After he reiterated that boundary, Jordan disappeared. A year passed without contact. By 2014, Jordan messaged Alex's mother, Geraldine, to inform her that she had given birth to a baby boy named Thomas. Born in May, she showed up at the family home with the baby. Geraldine, though initially cautious, quickly accepted her grandson. When Alex learned that his mother had let Jordan into the house, he was furious and confused as to why his mother had agreed. Geraldine, however, was resolute. She loves her son, but also wants a role in the life of her grandson, Thomas. She persuaded Alex to meet Thomas, promising Jordan would not be present. Nervous and unsure, Alex asked his grandfather Gerald, someone he was very close to come with him for support. Seeing his son for the first time changed him. Alex decided he wanted to be involved and be a father. This led to him meeting Jordan again. This time, she seemed calmer and more grounded. Motherhood appeared to have changed her. The relationship gradually shifted from co-parenting to something deeper. They reunited and in early 2015 announced they were back together. But trouble followed. Shortly after their reunion, Jordan met the girl she had attacked at Alex's birthday party and continued to assault her, causing the problem to flare up again. This time, Geraldine had reached her limit and issued an ultimatum. This behavior would not be tolerated. Jordan responded with an ultimatum of her own, forcing Alex to choose between his family and Thomas. Under unbearable pressure and determined to protect Thomas, Alex chose his son. In May 2015, he and Jordan moved into her parents' home. At 19, Alex's life changed completely. He became isolated from his family and childhood friends, and that isolation was not entirely voluntary. Behind closed doors, Jordan tightened control. She dictated his clothing, his hairstyle, and who he could speak to. She sent messages to his loved ones from his phone, posing as him to push them away, and eventually changed his number. Her control grew all-consuming. What began as restrictions and manipulation became full-blown domination. Alex, once hopeful and free, felt trapped and powerless. Emotional control escalated into relentless psychological abuse. Jordan repeatedly accused him of infidelity without evidence, undermining his confidence and independence. In an even more brutal act that crossed all boundaries, Jordan told Alex that his grandfather, Gerald, who was always by his side, had passed away. Alex was crushed and spent hours grieving. Then Jordan calmly confessed that it was a lie, a ploy to make him suffer and submit. The emotional torment became his daily reality. His ties to family and friends frayed as he sank deeper into isolation. In July 2016, they left Jordan's parents' home to start a new life, hoping to build an independent family life with their son Thomas. For a short time, things seemed to improve. In the new home, they decided to try for another baby, and Jordan became pregnant again. The news brought a moment of hope, but the peace did not last. Control soon tightened once more. Jordan confiscated Alex's wallet, broke his phone, and forbade him from working. Alex was forced to give up his job as a youth football coach, a role he had loved. From then on, every part of his life was controlled. Jordan made him attend all her university classes at the University of Hertfordshire because she feared he would visit his parents if left alone. Even his online identity was taken from him. Friends began to see a new social media profile under Alex's name, full of angry, hateful posts that didn't sound like him. They were right. Jordan had created a fake digital persona to push people away. Psychological abuse soon turned physical. At a local fair, she forced him to swallow an entire pack of sleeping pills. Punishment, she said, for a betrayal that existed only in her mind. Fortunately, the dose was not fatal, but her intentions were clear. She wanted to destroy him bit by bit. She used food as control, withholding meals until Alex's weight fell to dangerous levels. When he tried to resist, she twisted the story, convincing him he was the cause of their problems. At night, the attacks grew worse. She waited for him to fall asleep, then struck him on the head with a glass bottle kept by the bed. When he woke, she interrogated him with strange, destabilizing questions. Anything she could find became a weapon: glass bottles, clothes, sticks, even a comb. Once, while driving, she hit him in the mouth with a hairbrush and shattered a tooth. In agony, he pulled it out himself. The attacks then became more brutal. Jordan slashed his body with shallow cuts, always stopping short of inflicting serious injury but leaving scars. By early 2017, Alex was barely recognizable, physically injured, emotionally hollow, a shadow of his former self. His family had no idea where he was. They hadn't heard from him. In February 2017, in desperation, Alex called his grandfather, Gerald, the only person he trusted. Within hours, Gerald and other relatives arrived at the address Alex gave. They hadn't known where he lived until then. What they found marked the start of a long and painful recovery. When Alex's family reached the house, no one answered the door, so they alerted the police. The police came to question Jordan and Alex. Everything seemed normal on the surface, but Alex's gait was uneven, painful, and marked by trauma, a warning sign. On May 2, 2017, Jordan gave birth to their second child, a daughter named Iris. Alex hoped motherhood would soften her heart, as he had hoped when she gave birth to their son. The hope was short-lived. The abuse resumed and intensified. Despite the violence, Alex stayed, not out of love, but out of fear that Jordan would direct her rage at their children. He later said he remained to protect them. The situation reached a breaking point in late May 2017 when Jordan threw boiling water at Alex during an argument, scalding him. He begged to sit in a cold bath. She let him briefly, then dragged him out and threatened to burn him again if he disobeyed. The following days were the worst of his life. In early June, she attacked him with a serrated bread knife. Bleeding and with deep cuts on his hands, Alex tried to bandage them with a football sock. A neighbor, hearing screams, called emergency services. When police arrived, Alex blamed himself, a common response among victims. Jordan stood behind him, calm, telling officers he tended to self-harm. A few days later, on June 10, 2017, police returned for a welfare check. One officer was shocked by Alex's visible injuries and managed to pull him aside to speak privately in the patrol car. Hesitant at first, Alex finally spoke. After years of silent suffering, he told the truth. That day ended his nightmare. Jordan was arrested on suspicion of assault. Alex was taken to safety, fed, and given proper medical care. The first in months, doctors were stunned by his condition. He was severely malnourished and emaciated. They warned that without help, he could live less than 10 days. They also diagnosed a buildup of fluid on the brain caused by repeated blunt force trauma. During her police interview, Jordan denied the allegations, claiming Alex had chosen to isolate himself from his family. However, her testimony was damning. Jordan described in detail the methods of abuse, the objects she used, and how she used them, recounting the scene in a cold, unrepentant manner. On September 28, 2017, prosecutors charged her with 17 offenses, including grievous bodily harm and coercive control, the latter only recently recognized under UK law. At her April 2018 trial, Jordan pleaded guilty to all counts. Alex believed her plea was tactical, not remorseful. She seemed more troubled by being caught than by the harm she had caused. Later that month, she was sentenced to 7.5 years for serious bodily harm and an extra 6 months for coercive control, to be served concurrently, and was placed under an indefinite restraining order. It was a historic verdict. Jordan was the first woman in the UK to be convicted of coercive control since the crime was legalized in 2015. For Alex, the verdict brought a mixture of relief and sorrow. Years of trauma had damaged his emotional bearings, but he felt a long-awaited release and a sense that justice had been served. A request in June 2018 to review the sentence as unduly lenient was refused. On July 4, 2023, Jordan was released early after a parole panel concluded she no longer posed a risk, a decision that provoked public outrage and left many feeling the punishment did not match the crimes. Alex, however, chose not to dwell on her release. He focused on rebuilding his life. Today, Alex's life centers on resilience, fatherhood, and advocacy. His children are still too young to grasp the full story. He has kept every court file and document so that, when they are ready, he can explain it to them himself. He has returned to coaching football with a renewed purpose. His team's kit carries the contact details for Mankind, a UK charity for male victims of domestic abuse, and as an ambassador, he speaks up for people who are often overlooked. The tattoo Jordan forced him to get has been altered, now a roaring tiger, covering the wound and symbolizing the strength and survival he fought to regain. He has shared his experience in interviews, documentaries, and awareness campaigns, working to chip away at the stigma faced by male victims. Alex often reflects on how close he came to dying and on why he survived. His mission is straightforward: to help others recognize warning signs, escape toxic relationships, and understand that survival is possible. What began as a tragic ordeal has become a powerful testament to human endurance and a message of hope for many. Diaz met Jared James Deacus while working at Cheppy's Meat Market, a local grocery store in Tuckeria, Texas. At the time, Angie was a 21-year-old immigrant from Nicaragua who had come to the U.S. seeking a better life for herself and her family. Jared, also 21, had recently started working at the same store. The two quickly grew close. Angie is impressed with Jared's friendly personality and hard-working spirit, which harmonizes well with her responsibility and maturity, as she is the eldest of 4 siblings. During their work breaks, they would talk and laugh about their dreams and future plans. To her, Jared is a reliable support and brings her comfort, having left Nicaragua and her family behind, particularly her mother, who was battling cancer. Angie longed for someone to share her struggles and aspirations with. Her devotion to her family and determination to provide for them drove her to work multiple jobs, and Jared's companionship filled her with hope. Their friendship at work soon blossomed into a romantic relationship. Outside of work, they grew closer by sharing meals and discussing their goals. To those around them, Angie and Jared seemed like a happy and loving young couple, trying to build a future together in America. She had recently achieved a significant personal goal, becoming a fitness coach, a testament to her dedication and perseverance. Angie's co-workers at Cheppy's meat market often remarked on her joy when she was with Jared. Her boss, Veronica Jimenez, noted how she would brighten up when talking about him and described her as being incredibly happy in her relationship. However, as their relationship became more serious, small changes in Angie's behavior began to indicate that not everything was going smoothly. While these shifts were initially dismissed as normal life stresses, they began to raise concerns among her loved ones. Jared proposed to Angie after months of dating, and she was thrilled to accept. Marriage symbolized not just love, but also stability and partnership, which Angie hoped would help her continue supporting her family in Nicaragua. Their engagement was full of excitement as they planned for their future. On October 22, 2022, they tied the knot in a wedding ceremony officiated by Waller County Judge Trey Duhon, who later described them as a kind and loving young couple. Friends and family came together to celebrate what seemed to be the start of a happy, secure future for the pair. After their wedding, Angie and Jared decided to move into a small cabin on Jared's parents' property on Oak Hollow Boulevard in Waller County, Texas. This provided affordable housing as they worked on building their financial foundation as a couple. For Angie, who regularly sent money back to Nicaragua, the arrangement was practical. She balanced her job at Cheppy's meat market with her fitness coaching career, earning consistent praise from her manager, Ruth Armendariz, for her dedication and positive attitude. Co-workers described her as hardworking, energetic, and highly ambitious. However, cracks began to show in their seemingly happy relationship. While Angie kept up her cheerful persona, her boss, Veronica Jimenez, noticed subtle changes. Veronica recalled that some days Angie seemed different, explaining that she appeared tired, though it wasn't clear whether it was because of work or her relationship. Jared's arrest for driving under the influence, just a month into their marriage, was the first major warning sign. The incident occurred at a Whataburger restaurant, where employees called the police after Jared became aggressive and tried to force his way inside. Responding officers described him as belligerent and locked him out of the building. During a search of his car, police found a partially full bottle of Bud Light. Jared admitted to taking pills but couldn't specify the medication. Beyond the legal consequences, this event revealed aspects of Jared's behavior Angie likely had not fully understood before their marriage. The situation worsened during Jared's booking process, where his aggressive behavior escalated. Court records showed Jared threatened both the arresting officers and jail staff. His actions became so disruptive that he punched windows and had to be restrained in a chair for safety. This incident highlighted a troubling pattern of aggression that would later become even more significant. As time passed, friends and family noticed more worrying signs in Angie and Jared's marriage. While Angie had seemed very happy at first, her demeanor changed after the wedding. At social gatherings, friends saw a difference in her, though she never openly complained or sought help. One notable incident occurred at a Christmas party in December 2022, just weeks before Angie's death. Friends said that she and Jared left the party abruptly, and Jared looked very upset. Although this worried everyone, no one realized the true severity of the problem. During this period, law enforcement had been called to their home multiple times for domestic disturbances. While Waller County Sheriff Troy Guidry noted that these calls didn't involve extreme violence, they reflected ongoing conflict within the marriage. An unnamed friend of Angie later revealed that Jared had displayed possessive behavior during their marriage. He was described as jealous, and one particular social media post stood out, where Jared had written that she was his. The friend found it unsettling, commenting that no one had questioned their relationship, making the post seem unnecessary. Such possessiveness is often a warning sign of potential domestic violence. Despite the warning signs, Angie seemed determined to stay in her marriage. Her friends later speculated that she might have been too embarrassed to admit her relationship was struggling. This hesitation to seek help or openly talk about relationship issues is sadly common among domestic violence victims, who often feel ashamed or believe they can manage the situation on their own. What made Angie's story especially tragic was her unwavering devotion to her family in Nicaragua. Despite facing difficulties in her marriage, she worked 2 jobs to help fund her mother's cancer treatment, showcasing her selflessness and dedication. Her co-workers at Chepe's Meat Market and Taqueria described her as someone who always put others first and aimed to improve not just her own life, but her entire family's well-being. By January 2023, tensions in Angie and Jared's marriage were clearly escalating. While the specifics of their private arguments remain unknown, it was evident that underlying issues were coming to a dangerous head. Angie, who had immigrated to the U.S. with hope and determination, found herself trapped in a marriage that had become increasingly volatile and unsafe. On the morning of January 11, 2023, surveillance footage captured Jared at Angie's workplace around 11:40 a.m. The video showed him entering the store, grabbing a beer, and leaving without paying. Even more alarming, he was seen drinking the beer in his car before driving away. This illegal act and erratic behavior suggested Jared was in a highly unstable mental state, possibly reflecting or preparing for what was to come. The footage provided critical insight, revealing a man acting irrationally just hours before an unthinkable crime. Jared's casual theft, his reckless drinking behind the wheel, and his escalating instability painted a picture of someone whose judgment was severely impaired. These actions foreshadowed a tragedy that would devastate 2 families and shock the Waller County community. Later that day, at approximately 4:35 p.m., Jared's parents made a 911 call that would change lives forever. They reported a possible death at their property, specifically inside the small cabin where Jared and Angie lived. Sheriff Troy Guidry later said Jared's father contacted authorities shortly after Jared entered the main house and made a disturbing comment, causing them to worry about Angie's safety. When Waller County deputies arrived, they encountered what Sheriff Troy described as a horrific scene. Inside the cabin, they found Angie's lifeless body near the bed, amidst evidence of extreme violence. She had suffered multiple stab wounds to her back, and the brutality of the attack was shocking. Blood was splattered throughout the cabin, and investigators discovered her body on the floor near the bed in a pool of blood. Disturbingly, her severed head was found in the shower. The severity of the violence left even seasoned law enforcement officers horrified. Crime scene investigators determined that a kitchen knife was used in the attack. Sheriff Troy confirmed that everything occurred on the property, and all evidence was recovered and submitted. The events of that day marked one of the most horrendous crimes in Waller County's history, leaving an indelible mark on the community and on everyone who knew Angie. The brutal and calculated nature of the violence, along with the disposal of Angie's body, shocked investigators. When deputies arrived at the crime scene, they found Jared still present on the property. Rather than fleeing or hiding his actions, he stayed at the location where he had committed the horrific crime. Jared and his parents were taken in for questioning, but it quickly became evident that Jared was solely responsible for the violent act. During his initial interview, Jared gave what Sheriff Troy described as a complete and straightforward confession, admitting to murdering his wife, Angie. While he described what he had done, he offered no explanation or motive for the senseless brutality. Jared confessed to killing Angie in their shared home. However, the lack of a clear motive left investigators and the community stunned. It was incomprehensible that a 21-year-old man could commit such a heinous act against his wife, whom he had married just 3 months earlier. The randomness and cruelty of the crime contradicted everything people believed about Jared and his relationship with Angie. The investigation revealed further disturbing details about the incident of January 11, 2023. Evidence indicated that Angie had fought desperately for her life. Multiple stab wounds to her back suggested that she had tried to flee or defend herself during the attack. Adding to the heartbreak, was the discovery that Angie had reportedly been living in fear in the weeks leading up to her death. Prior calls to law enforcement hinted at rising tensions within the home, though no one had anticipated such a horrifying conclusion. For Angie's family in Nicaragua, the loss was beyond devastating. She had left her home country to create a better life and support her family's medical expenses, but her dreams ended in an unimaginable tragedy. Her mother, already battling cancer, now faced the overwhelming grief of losing her eldest daughter. The crime scene investigation lasted several days as law enforcement meticulously gathered evidence to piece together what had happened in the cabin that afternoon. Although the physical evidence detailed the brutal tragedy, the deeper psychological and emotional factors behind Jared's actions remained unclear. When Jared was charged with murder and booked into the Waller County Jail, the community began to confront the reality of how domestic violence could escalate to such a serious level. Although there had been prior warnings, including domestic disturbance reports and concerning behavior from Jared, no one foresaw the violence that ultimately unfolded. The investigation also shed light on Angie's life and the dreams that were tragically cut short. Friends and colleagues shared memories of her ambition, dedication to her family, and pride in her work as a fitness coach. Her untimely death felt even more tragic, as it robbed her of a bright future and a positive impact she had been making on those around her. As the trial progresses, many questions remain about Jared's motive for committing this horrific crime. Although further details about Jared's mental state and behavior emerged during the investigation, the fundamental question of why this tragedy occurred remained only partially answered. With Jared in custody and having confessed to the crime, attention turned to the legal process that would decide his fate. However, no outcome could restore the life lost or ease the grief of Angie's loved ones, who had envisioned a brighter future for her in America. The case immediately raised important questions about domestic violence, mental health, and the systems meant to protect vulnerable individuals. Just months before the crime, Jared had been arrested for DWI and exhibited violent behavior during that incident, yet no system intervened to prevent him from continuing to pose a threat to Angie. Following his arrest and confession, investigators closely examined Jared's background and mental health to understand what led to the tragedy. During the pre-trial phase, Jared's mental health and competency to stand trial became significant concerns. The Waller County Criminal District Attorney's Office acknowledged questions about his mental state. This prompted a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation to determine if Jared could comprehend the charges and participate in his defense. After a thorough assessment, the psychiatrist concluded that, despite any mental health issues, Jared was competent to stand trial. This determination allowed the legal process to proceed, holding Jared fully accountable for his actions. Initially, he was held on a $500,000 bond, but Waller County Criminal District Attorney Sean G. Whitmore argued that this amount was inadequate given the severity of the crime. Citing the brutal nature of Angie's murder and Jared's history of violent behavior, Sean petitioned for the bond to be increased to $1 million. The district attorney's request was supported by Jared's past actions, including his threats against police officers and jail staff during his arrest 2 months prior. These incidents highlighted Jared's violent tendencies, especially under stress or the influence of substances, and emphasized the public safety risk he posed. After hearing both sides, the judge approved raising the bond to $1 million and ordered an additional mental health evaluation to further assess Jared's psychological state before trial. As legal proceedings moved forward, District Attorney Whitmore worked closely with Angie's family to understand their feelings and priorities. While grieving and organizing the repatriation of Angie's remains to Nicaragua, the family expressed a desire for justice without enduring a prolonged and painful trial. Prosecutors and defense attorneys began discussions on a plea agreement that could resolve the case without a trial. This agreement aimed to secure a significant prison sentence for Jared while sparing Angie's family the trauma of revisiting the tragic details in court. The negotiations were challenging, requiring a balance between the severity of the crime, the legal process, and the family's wishes. Prosecutors sought a resolution that acknowledged the heinous nature of the crime while offering closure to those grieving Angie. Meanwhile, the community grappled with the broader implications of the tragedy. Domestic violence advocates used the case to raise awareness about recognizing warning signs and supporting individuals in potentially dangerous relationships. The multiple visits by law enforcement to Jared and Angie's home before the murders were a clear warning that domestic violence can escalate over time and often leads to serious consequences. On July 31, 2024, more than a year after Angie's death, Jared James Deacus appeared in court before Judge Gary Cheney to finalize a plea agreement that resolved the case. Jared pleaded guilty to murdering his wife, resulting in a 40-year prison sentence in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice Institutional Division. As part of this agreement, Jared gave up his right to appeal the verdict, waived potential defenses, including insanity, and forfeited his ability to file future habeas corpus petitions. This significantly reduces his chances of appealing his sentence. Jared will not be eligible for parole until at least 2043, meaning he is set to spend decades behind bars. As District Attorney of Whitmore County explained, being eligible does not mean being guaranteed a pardon. If denied, Jared could spend even more time in prison. Angie's family was heavily consulted throughout the process to ensure their wishes were respected. They agreed to the plea deal, believing it honored Angie's memory and allowed them the closure needed to begin healing. At the sentencing, the emotional toll on Angie's family and community was evident. District Attorney Whitmore reiterated Waller County's commitment to combating domestic violence, stating that Waller County does not tolerate domestic violence and that crimes like this would not go unanswered. He emphasized that they would fight for victims and hold perpetrators accountable. He also praised the Waller County Sheriff's Office for their thorough investigation and commitment to justice. For Angie's family, the sentencing marked the end of a painful legal process, but also the beginning of the long road to healing. While nothing could bring Angie back, knowing Jared was held accountable brought a measure of justice. At the same time, they faced the challenge of rebuilding their lives while carrying the weight of their loss. This case highlighted the devastating impact of domestic violence and the importance of recognizing warning signs, such as the concerning behavior Jared exhibited before the murder, missed opportunities to intervene, such as prior police calls to their home, Jared's violent actions during a DWI arrest, and reports of possessive behavior underscored the need for greater awareness and proactive measures. In the aftermath, community groups and domestic violence advocates used Angie's story to educate others about the warning signs of abusive relationships and resources available to those at risk. Her tragic death became a catalyst for discussions about protecting vulnerable individuals and preventing similar tragedies. The case also shed light on the complex relationship between mental health and criminal accountability. While Jared's mental health was acknowledged during the trial, the court deemed him competent and held him fully responsible for his actions. This affirmed the principle that mental health challenges cannot excuse or justify acts of violence, even when they provide context for the behavior. When Jared began his sentence, Angie's family focused on honoring her memory and supporting others facing similar struggles. They collaborated with community organizations to raise awareness about domestic violence and ensured Angie's story served as both a warning and inspiration for change. While the legal system brought justice in this case, the ultimate goal should be prevention, protecting young women like Angie before they fall victim to such violence. Those who knew Angie remember her as a hopeful, ambitious young woman who loved her family deeply. Her tragic death, at just 21, represents not only a personal loss to her loved ones, but also a collective loss to the community. Angie's dreams, dedication to supporting her family, and success as a fitness coach highlight the bright future taken from her. Ultimately, she will not be remembered solely as a victim of domestic violence, but as a determined, hard-working young woman who came to America seeking a better life for herself and her family. District Attorney Whitmore emphasized that they would seek justice for victims of domestic violence and send a message to perpetrators that in their jurisdiction, they fight for their victims. Angie's case, he noted, underscores both the critical need for this fight and the devastating consequences of unchecked violence. He stated that her memory would continue to inspire efforts to prevent such tragedies and assist those in need of safety and support to escape dangerous situations. Irene Oldag, later known as Julie Keown, had a peaceful and happy childhood in the town of Plattsburgh, Missouri, located in the heart of the American Midwest. Born on May 16, 1973, she was the eldest of two children. Growing up alongside her younger brother, Chad, Julie's parents, Nancy and Jack, were well-respected members of the community. They lived modestly but comfortably, sustained by their farm work. Growing up on the farm taught Julie responsibility and humility. Julie left a lasting impression on everyone she met. She was empathetic, selfless, and always ready to help others, with a calming presence that put people at ease. Her quiet strength and sense of purpose developed early. Academically, she excelled thanks to the support of her loving family. She attended high-quality schools and consistently earned praise from her teachers. Her compassion eventually inspired her to pursue a career in nursing. Determined to make a difference, she enrolled at William Jewell College in Liberty, Missouri. There, she not only thrived academically, but also formed close friendships. However, she sometimes felt as though something was missing. Seeing many of her friends embark on romantic relationships, Julie was eager to find someone to spend her life with. Through a mutual friend, she was set up on a blind date with fellow student James Keown. James, a year younger than Julie, had a personality that contrasted with hers. Charismatic, outgoing, and ambitious, James was well known on campus for his work at the college radio station and his aspirations for a career in broadcasting. Coming from a privileged background, James was the son of a respected lobbyist and his wife, Betty, who had high hopes for their 6 children. James stood out in his family for his bold, confident personality and ability to command attention, traits that were both admired and controversial. In Julie, he found a calm, gentle presence that complemented his own strong energy. Meanwhile, Julie was attracted to James's drive and enthusiasm. Their connection was instantaneous, and they soon became inseparable, forming a well-known couple on campus. While still in college, James began working as a local radio host, quickly becoming a familiar voice in the community. Julie remained focused on her nursing studies and clinical training, preparing for the challenges of her career. After graduating, they married and moved to Kansas City, eager to build their life together. Both flourished professionally. Julie became a nurse whose empathy and dedication to her work made her exceptional. She treated each patient with care and respect, earning the admiration of her colleagues and superiors. Meanwhile, James continued to advance in his radio career, managing roles at 2 stations and steadily building his reputation. Together, they appeared to have a perfect life, young, ambitious, and dedicated to their professions. Their relationship was built on shared values, mutual support, and a balance of Julie's calm demeanor and James's outgoing nature. However, as James's career grew, so did the demands on his time. His schedule became packed with meetings and side projects, leaving little time for rest or quality time together. Although their home was filled with love, it often felt empty due to their busy lives. Both juggled early mornings, long days, and late nights, caught up in a fast-paced rhythm. Despite his hectic schedule, James made an effort to keep their relationship strong. He surprised Julie with weekend trips and thoughtful gifts, small tokens of his affection that she deeply appreciated, even though she never asked for them. Julie adored James deeply, her love for him unwavering and steadfast. Since James's career required frequent moves, They adapted by living in cities like Chicago before eventually returning to Kansas. Although these relocations were challenging, Julie supported James wholeheartedly, adjusting to each new environment with grace. James was known professionally for his creativity, adaptability, and sharp mind. With a background in marketing, his skills and innovative ideas made him an invaluable employee, which was reflected in his impressive income. His family enjoyed a comfortable and privileged lifestyle, owning a beautiful home and traveling frequently. He appreciated luxury, wearing fine watches, driving new cars, and regularly upgrading them. In contrast, Julie valued simple pleasures. Her family noticed how well she seemed to be doing and felt happy about her marriage to James, which outwardly appeared both harmonious and successful. As time passed, relatives began to inquire about their plans to have children. However, for James and Julie, this was a painful subject. They had been trying to conceive for years without success, despite undergoing countless tests, consulting specialists, and exploring every available option. There was no medical explanation for their infertility. Despite the hardship, they remained hopeful and continued with their lives, bearing the heavy weight of uncertainty. James redirected his focus to his career, pursuing personal growth and professional recognition. Already well regarded in his local community as a radio presenter, James set his sights higher. In 2003, he applied to Harvard Business School and was accepted with a prestigious scholarship. This achievement transformed their lives. They moved to Boston so James could start his studies. While Julie transitioned to remote work in medical software development, James also took on remote marketing projects. Although Julie wholeheartedly supported his ambitions, the move created emotional challenges for her. She missed her family, their home in Missouri, and the sense of familiarity she had left behind. Nevertheless, her love for James and her pride in his accomplishments kept her devoted to him. At Harvard, James surrounded himself with influential people and worked hard to build an impressive public image. Yet, despite his many achievements, he always seemed to crave more. Meanwhile, Julie continues to hope for a baby, although her health begins to decline alarmingly. Around 8 months after their move to Boston, she started experiencing constant fatigue, muscle pain, and frequent illnesses. Multiple medical exams provided no clear answers. Then, on August 20th, 2004, her condition suddenly took a turn for the worse. She woke up disoriented, with severe headaches, and found herself unable to perform basic tasks. She slurred her words, struggled to write, and felt the world spinning. Alarmed, James rushed her to the hospital, where her symptoms quickly worsened. Doctors immediately recognized the seriousness of her condition and conducted urgent tests. Suspicion fell on her kidneys as her health declined rapidly. By August 2004, Julie received life-changing news: her kidneys were no longer functioning properly. This became the first real clue to her long-standing health struggles, including infertility, though the connection was not fully understood. Despite extensive testing, her symptoms, muscle weakness, confusion, and fatigue did not align entirely with typical kidney failure cases. Some doctors initially suspected that Julie might have a rare kidney condition, but they were unable to arrive at a definitive diagnosis. After spending 3 days in the hospital, her condition unexpectedly improved without any clear medical intervention. With no solid explanation for her symptoms beyond potential kidney issues, she was discharged. Although the doctors were baffled, her symptoms eased, and she became eager to move forward, hoping to recover both emotionally and physically. She took a short trip to Missouri to visit her family, surrounded by loved ones and the comforting familiarity of home. Julie's spirits lifted, her strength returned, and her family was relieved to see her smiling and full of energy once more. It seemed the worst was behind her. However, this relief was short-lived. Not long after returning to Boston, Julie's health declined again. Her symptoms, dizziness, fatigue, and speech difficulties resurfaced. Albeit less severe than before, her family grew increasingly concerned, speculating that her episodes might have a psychological origin, perhaps stemming from the stress of relocating, the emotional strain of infertility, or even feelings of homesickness. Even Julie's doctors entertained the possibility that stress was a contributing factor. Yet, despite these theories, the possibility of a more serious underlying condition couldn't be ruled out. Tragically, on September 4, 2004, just 2 weeks after her initial hospitalization, Julie's condition took a dramatic and alarming turn for the worse. She was admitted to the hospital again, gravely ill, barely able to speak, nearly completely paralyzed, and soon slipping into a coma. It became evident to the medical team that her kidneys were not the primary issue. Something far more destructive and mysterious was ravaging her body. Despite extensive testing, the doctors were unable to pinpoint the cause, and Julie's organs began to fail one by one. In an unexpected breakthrough, a nurse made a critical suggestion: conduct a toxicology screening. Although such a test was uncommon in cases like Julie's, the nurse's intuition proved to be pivotal. The toxicology report revealed a horrifying truth. Julie had ethylene glycol in her system, a poisonous chemical commonly found in antifreeze and engine coolant. The symptoms of ethylene glycol poisoning, kidney failure, confusion, and severe physical decline matched Julie's condition perfectly. The report confirmed she had been deliberately poisoned. As Julie lay comatose and unresponsive on September 4th, her family rushed to the hospital, devastated by her deterioration, helpless to do anything but wait. They watched her condition worsen. After 4 days in a coma, on September 8, 2004, Julie passed away at the age of 31. Despite the relentless efforts of the medical team, the diagnosis had come too late. Her body had suffered too much damage to recover. Her sudden death left her family and friends in shock. Only days earlier, she had been laughing and talking with her loved ones. Now, she was gone. The toxicology findings immediately raised suspicions of foul play. Julie's parents were convinced that someone had intentionally poisoned her, and all signs pointed to someone close to her. Suspicion quickly fell on her husband, James. Detectives launched an investigation, as the presence of ethylene glycol automatically triggered a criminal inquiry. They gathered medical records, household items, and witness statements to piece together what had happened. Publicly, James presented himself as a grieving widower, expressing shock and sorrow over Julie's untimely death. He denied any involvement, even speculating that she might have accidentally or intentionally ingested antifreeze during a moment of depression brought on by her health struggles, their move to Boston, and their inability to conceive. However, not everyone believed his claims. The nurse who initially suggested the toxicology screening later reported that James's behavior during Julie's hospital stay had been unsettling. He often dominated conversations with doctors, frequently answering questions on Julie's behalf and giving the impression that he was controlling her care. Some people argued James's actions were likely a result of Julie's illness. Perhaps he was simply trying to advocate for her when she couldn't speak for herself. However, others found his behavior suspicious. At one point, James even suggested a peculiar theory, claiming that Julie might have mistakenly consumed antifreeze, believing it to be a different liquid. Investigators became more suspicious upon learning that Julie had a $250,000 life insurance policy. At first glance, this might not seem like a strong motive for her husband, James, who seemed to live a comfortable life. However, doubts began to arise. Was James as wealthy as he appeared, or was his wealth just an illusion? Shortly after Julie's death, a new clue came to light. The landlord of James and Julie's Boston apartment contacted the authorities after James suddenly disappeared, leaving the apartment and abandoning personal belongings such as Julie's wedding dress, their wedding rings, and photos from their wedding, items a grieving husband would typically treasure. It was soon revealed that James had returned to Missouri, where he began a new job as a talk show host at a local radio station, seemingly eager to start afresh. Investigators uncovered troubling details about James's life in Boston. He hadn't paid rent for months, his luxury car had been repossessed, and, shockingly, he had forged a letter claiming he had been accepted into Harvard Business School, a lie he used to justify working remotely for a marketing company. This company had hired him for a high-paying project to design a website, but he failed to deliver results and appeared to lack the necessary skills for the job. Instead, he embezzled funds allocated for the project. His resume was filled with fabricated job experiences, including positions at companies where he had never worked. Even Julie, his wife, was unaware of the full extent of his deceit. Despite pretending to go to work, buying new furniture, and maintaining a luxurious lifestyle, James's financial troubles deepened. He had no stable income. His utilities were about to be cut off, and he was drowning in debt. At some point, Julie's life insurance policy became a potential solution to James's mounting financial problems. Back in Missouri, James shared inconsistent stories about Julie's death with his new acquaintances. Some say she died of a mysterious illness. Others say she harmed herself. When asked what he planned to do with the insurance money, he casually remarked that he would buy a BMW. He also mentioned dating someone new and wanting to start a family. As suspicion grew, investigators turned their attention to James. Although his behavior raised numerous red flags, the evidence against him remained circumstantial. Friends recalled James confidently boasting that he couldn't be convicted because there was no direct proof. Oddly, however, he never explicitly denied involvement in Julie's death. Investigators conducted thorough searches of his Boston apartment, his family's property, and his home in Missouri, but nothing incriminating was found until they examined his computer. Despite his attempts to wipe his hard drive clean, forensic experts recovered disturbing internet searches, such as how to get rid of someone and antifreeze poisoning. These searches aligned with Julie's toxicology results. Investigators also discovered that James had encouraged Julie to drink Gatorade weeks before her death, claiming it was good for her health. Toxicology tests would later reveal that she had been poisoned with ethylene glycol, the main ingredient in antifreeze, over an extended period, explaining the mysterious illness she suffered before her death. Based on this evidence, prosecutors began building their case. In 2005, James was arrested, and his trial began in 2008. Although much of the evidence was circumstantial, it painted a consistent and damning picture of James, his financial ruin, fraudulent lifestyle, and the timing of Julie's poisoning all pointed to him. Many who had once admired James were shocked to learn the extent of his lies, though some described him as a loving husband and found it difficult to believe he could commit such a calculated crime. The defense argued that Julie may have deliberately or accidentally ingested the antifreeze herself, citing her emotional struggles with poor health and infertility. They also questioned the reliability of the toxicology reports, suggesting there was no concrete evidence that James had administered the poison. Despite their efforts to cast doubt the search history, James's encouragement for Julie to drink Gatorade, the life insurance motive, and his pattern of deceit proved overwhelming for the jury. Although no physical container of antifreeze was found, the evidence revealed Julie had been gradually poisoned. In her final weeks, she had confided in friends that James had been attentive and had repeatedly urged her to drink Gatorade, despite her dislike of it. What is most suspicious is that after Julie passed away, James rushed to claim the insurance money and quickly moved on with his life, making his behavior even more suspicious. In 2008, James Keown was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The court concluded that he had deliberately and methodically poisoned his wife by spiking her drinks with ethylene glycol, ultimately causing her death. To this day, James continues to maintain his innocence. However, Julie's family firmly believes that justice was appropriately served. In 2017, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court upheld his conviction, stating that the evidence against him was overwhelming. Julie Keown, remembered as a compassionate nurse, a devoted wife, and a loving daughter, was tragically taken from the world far too soon. Her kindness, sincerity, and grace live on in the memories of those who knew her and in the relentless pursuit of truth that arose following her untimely passing. Samantha Vernagallo and Drew Garnier first crossed paths as young adults on Long Island, New York, where they both grew up. While the specifics of their first meeting remain private, it's clear that their connection blossomed during their early 20s. Samantha, who lives in Center Reach, is a former student of Center Reach High School. She is well liked for her warm, caring personality and her dream of raising a happy family. Drew, from nearby Lake Grove, shared her aspirations for a traditional family life. Over time, their bond deepened as they discovered they both envisioned the same future: marriage, children, and building a meaningful life together. Samantha appreciates Drew's stability and commitment to creating a safe living environment. Those who know them see them as a loving couple, working toward a common goal of a happy future. Thanks to the support from their family, both Samantha and Drew grew up mature and did not face any serious issues. Neither had a troubling past. No criminal records, substance abuse, or significant mental health concerns. Drew held steady employment and showed dedication to supporting his growing family, while Samantha was known for her beauty, compassion, and devotion to her loved ones. After several years together, they married and had 2 daughters, Adelina, followed by Izzy. 3 years later, Samantha embraced motherhood wholeheartedly, always putting her daughters first and ensuring they felt safe and loved. As the family grew, they began to feel the financial pressures of living on Long Island, dreaming of a quieter, more affordable life where their daughters could thrive. Samantha and Drew decided to leave Long Island and relocate to Masonville, a small town in Delaware County, New York, situated in the scenic Catskills region, about 150 miles northwest of New York City. Masonville offered the simpler lifestyle they desired: lower living costs, a close-knit community, and a peaceful environment where children could safely play and grow. The family settled into a mobile home on Hook Road, a quiet area where neighbors knew one another and a sense of community prevailed. For Samantha and Drew, the move symbolized a fresh start. Samantha envisioned an idyllic childhood for her daughters, filled with natural beauty, fresh air, and the security of a supportive community. She remained fully committed to her family, caring deeply for her 9-year-old daughter Adelina and 6-year-old Izzy. Drew quickly adapted to the new lifestyle as well, finding work and showing dedication to his family. From the outside, Drew and Samantha Garnier appeared to have a strong marriage and a happy family life. Their life in Masonville seemed stable and focused on building a better future for their 2 daughters. Their joy grew even more when Samantha found out she was pregnant with their 3rd child. By September 2024, she was 5 months along and had learned they were expecting another daughter. For Samantha, this news brought immense happiness. She cherished being a mother and was excited about welcoming another little girl. However, those close to the family noticed that Drew's reaction to the news was quite different. While Samantha celebrated the idea of another daughter, Drew had been hoping for a son. Family members later revealed that Drew's desire for a boy had intensified with each pregnancy. Hearing they would have a 3rd daughter deeply disappointed him and seemed to affect him in ways that no one could have foreseen. Despite this hidden tension, there were no visible signs that Drew was capable of violence. He had no criminal record, history of domestic abuse, or encounters with law enforcement. To their neighbors, their family was an ordinary family, adapting to life in a small town. Samantha, although noticing subtle changes in Drew's behavior, remained focused on her family and the upcoming birth of their 3rd daughter in February 2025. She also looked forward to celebrating her 30th birthday, just 2 weeks away. Life in their family household carried on as usual during late summer and early fall of 2024. Adelina and Izzy, the daughters, went to school each day. Samantha managed the house while preparing for the new baby, and Drew went to work. Anyone observing the family would have seen a picture of normalcy, but underneath, Drew's disappointment about the baby's gender was quietly festering. With no outward signs of trouble, no calls to the police or family interventions, no one could have predicted the tragedy that was about to unfold. Those who later tried to understand Drew's actions were baffled. On the surface, he seemed to have everything: a loving wife, 2 healthy daughters, steady employment, and another child on the way. Samantha had built a life filled with love and stability for their family, but for reasons no one could fathom, the good things in Drew's life became a source of anger. On the night of Wednesday, September 4th, 2024, just days after Labor Day, their household appeared to be winding down from a normal day. Adelina and Izzy were likely getting ready for bed, and Samantha, 5 months pregnant, was caring for her daughters and preparing for the evening. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but beneath the surface, Drew's frustrations had reached their breaking point. At around 11:29 p.m., the quiet town of Masonville was jolted by an emergency that shocked the entire community. Drew called 911 to report what he described as a domestic dispute at their family home. To the dispatcher, Drew sounded like a man trying to help his wife. He claimed Samantha had been injured and that he was applying pressure to her wounds to stop the bleeding. However, when police arrived at the scene, they discovered a horrifying scene that was completely opposite to what Drew described, permanently shattering the image of a peaceful family. New York State Police troopers Corey King and Ronald King were dispatched to respond to an emergency call. When the troopers arrived at the mobile home with its covered porch, they were prepared to assist what they believed was an injured woman. Instead, they were confronted with an unthinkable scene. As they approached, Drew briefly stuck his head out the front door before quickly retreating inside. His suspicious behavior immediately alerted the troopers that something was wrong. Shortly after, a single gunshot echoed from inside the house, sending shockwaves through the officers. They quickly retreated to the end of the driveway and called for backup from a Delaware County Sheriff's deputy, using the deputy's patrol car as cover. The officers cautiously approached the house again. Suddenly, Adelina, a 9-year-old girl, emerged from the home, running toward the police with her clothes soaked in blood. The officers' hearts sank as they realized this child had witnessed unimaginable violence. Through tears, Adelina told the officers that her mother had been stabbed and that her father, Drew, was still inside the house with a gun. As they worked to protect Adelina, her 6-year-old sibling, Izzy, also ran out, similarly covered in blood. Both sisters were deeply affected by the horrific events that had just occurred. Despite being injured and in shock, they still tried to talk to the police. The officers provided first aid to the children and called for additional medical assistance. It was clear that both girls had endured a horrific ordeal. Once they were safely transported to receive medical care, the focus turned back to Drew inside the house. The officers called out for him to surrender, and to their surprise, he walked out of the home with his hands raised. Drew was immediately arrested without resistance. The officers noted he was covered in blood and had cuts on his hands. During his arrest, police found a butter knife in his pocket, a chilling piece of evidence that would later shed light on the brutal events of that night. Inside the house, the officers found Samantha lying on her side, critically injured with multiple stab wounds. Despite their efforts to provide life-saving aid, it was clear her injuries were severe. Emergency medical personnel arrived, and Samantha was airlifted to Wilson Medical Center in Johnson City. Both daughters, Izzy and Adelina, were flown to Upstate Medical Center in Syracuse as well, due to the severity of their injuries. Investigators later determined that all 3 victims had been subjected to a prolonged and brutal attack. Tragically, Samantha succumbed to her injuries and was pronounced dead at the hospital. She was only 29 years old and just 2 weeks away from her 30th birthday. Her unborn daughter, whom she had been 5 months pregnant with, also did not survive. Adelina and Izzy remained hospitalized in serious condition but were expected to recover physically. However, the emotional trauma they endured would require extensive therapy and support for years. Drew was transported to A.O. Fox Hospital for treatment of superficial self-inflicted wounds. After receiving care, he was processed at the New York State Police Barracks in Sydney. He was charged and faced full legal accountability for the horrific attack. The investigation that followed was detailed and exhaustive, led by New York State Police, with support from the Delaware County Sheriff's Office and local law enforcement agencies. Major Lucas Shooter, commander of Troop C, held a press conference on September 6, 2024, to provide new information regarding the arrest and charges in the case. What made this case particularly unsettling for investigators was that it marked the first time the state police had been called to Samantha and Drew's residence for a domestic issue. There were no prior reports, no history of domestic violence, and no indication that Drew was capable of such violence toward his own family. As the investigation progressed, police discovered additional alarming evidence. A search of the property revealed that Drew owned multiple firearms and 2 high-capacity ammunition-feeding devices. These findings led to weapons-related charges being added to the list of crimes he faced. On September 5, 2024, Drew Garnier was officially charged with second-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted second-degree murder. He was arraigned at Delhi Town Court and sent to the Delaware County Jail without bail. Recognizing the gravity of the case, Delaware County District Attorney Shah Smith quickly convened an emergency grand jury session. On September 11, 2024, the grand jury issued an 8-count indictment against Drew. In addition to the original charges, the indictment included weapons violations, second-degree murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, criminal use of a firearm, and multiple counts of illegal weapon possession. Drew pleaded not guilty to all charges at his arraignment before Delaware County Court. Judge John L. Hubbard, who ordered him to remain in the custody of the Delaware County Sheriff's Office without bail. If convicted on all charges, Drew faced a potential sentence of 25 years to life in prison. However, as the case advanced, it became evident that going to trial would force his daughters, Adelina and Izzy, to relive the trauma of that horrific night by testifying. To prevent further emotional harm to the girls, prosecutors opted for a negotiated plea deal. On March 25, 2025, Drew pleaded guilty to reduced charges of first-degree manslaughter and 2 counts of first-degree assault in exchange for a total sentence of 30 years in state prison, followed by 15 years of post-release supervision. District Attorney Smith explained that, although the sentence was lower than the maximum possible sentence, the agreement was in the best interests of Izzy and Adelina. The sentencing hearing took place on May 13, 2025, in Delaware County Court. The courtroom was filled with family members, community members, and court officials. During the hearing, only one victim impact statement was read, that of Samantha's father, Gregory Vernagallo. He provided critical insight into what had driven the crime. Gregory informed the court that Drew had wanted a boy and became furious when he found out Samantha was pregnant with their 3rd daughter. He explained that this shocking revelation, that gender disappointment had motivated such horrific violence, had added a deeply disturbing dimension to an already tragic case. He also shared that he had adopted his 2 granddaughters and devoted his life to raising them, stating that he was their father now and would protect them. He added that he hadn't left their sides since the attack. When given the chance to speak, Drew addressed the court with apparent remorse and expressed his regret to his in-laws, especially his children. He also expressed hope that someday he could make amends with his kids. He said he would not force anything on them and respected their decisions, but added that if they ever wanted to see him, he hoped he would be allowed to be there for them. Public defender Joseph Hermedi emphasized the lack of logic behind the crime, stating that his client, Drew, had no explanation for what had happened. Joseph described the situation as extremely tragic and mentioned that he didn't believe anyone would disagree with that assessment. Judge John L. Hubbard considered Drew's clean record before sentencing him. The judge said Drew had taken the life of his wife and harmed his children, who were entitled to his protection, and sentenced him to 30 years in prison. During the hearing, Drew asked for permission to continue contact with his daughters, Izzy and Adelina, while incarcerated. Delaware County District Attorney Shah Smith strongly opposed the request, urging the court to impose the longest possible no-contact orders. Judge John agreed and issued stay-away orders for both Izzy and Adelina until 2056, which is 8 years beyond Drew's maximum potential release date. The judge added that if the daughters ever wished to contact their father, they could petition the court to revise the protective orders. Drew refused to sign the court orders, but they were served to him in court regardless. His refusal was seen as further resistance to accepting responsibility for his actions against his children. This heartbreaking case has had devastating consequences for all involved. Samantha and Drew's 2 daughters, Adelina and Izzy, are now orphans because of their father's actions. The girls are now legally adopted by their grandfather Gregory and have moved to a new home to settle down and receive better care. A GoFundMe campaign organized by Aaron Leahy from Center raised over $16,000 to support Izzy and Adelina. The campaign described Samantha, the girl's mother, as compassionate and loving. It revealed that Samantha was pregnant with a baby girl due in February 2025 and was just weeks away from celebrating her 30th birthday when her life was tragically cut short. The crime shocked the residents of Masonville, a small, peaceful community where such acts of violence are extremely rare. District Attorney Sean Smith commended law enforcement for their diligent investigation and dedication. He mentioned that what made the case especially chilling was the lack of any warning signs that could have foreshadowed such violence. Drew Garnier had no prior criminal record, mental health issues, or prior interactions with law enforcement. The revelation that gender disappointment over an unborn child could escalate to the murder of a pregnant wife and an attack on his daughters serves as a sobering reminder of how domestic violence can erupt without any prior indications. Krentel grew up in New Orleans in a humble, close-knit family. Her parents, Dan and Pat Watson, raised her along with her siblings Kim, Eliza, and 3 half-siblings and taught her important values of loyalty and kindness, known for her gentle and caring nature. Nanette had a deep love for animals and shared her home with 2 cats and a dog. Despite moving away, she maintained a close bond with her family, especially her father and sisters, speaking with them daily. In 1994, at 27 years old, Nanette met Steve Krentel while applying for a job at his office supply store. Steve, then 28, owned both a scuba gear business and the store, and was going through a divorce at the time. Their professional relationship soon turned romantic, and after Steve finalized his divorce, he introduced Nanette to his young son, Justin. By 1995, they were married. Steve's native of Louisiana. He grew up near Lacombe and reportedly had a tense relationship with his brother, Brian. In 2000, Steve and Nanette moved to Lacombe, closer to his parents. He gradually worked his way up in the Tammany Parish Fire Department, eventually becoming the fire chief. Respected for his professionalism, his career in the fire department provided him with financial security and influence in the community. In 1997, after Steve sold both of his businesses, Nanette shifted her career path. She began working at a daycare center, where her kind and attentive nature earned the trust of parents and co-workers. Beyond her job, she became involved in the community, organizing fundraisers and charitable events, as well as supporting local fire departments by selling handmade ceramics and baked goods. By 2017, she had been out of the workforce for several years, focusing instead on her home, her pets, and continued community involvement. Although she had no children, Nanette was always concerned and attentive to the lives of her loved ones. She often played a central role in family matters, offering emotional and financial support to her loved ones. To outsiders, she and Steve seemed to lead a peaceful life, residing on 100 acres of scenic remote property in Lacombe. However, behind closed doors, Nanette grew increasingly concerned for her safety after Steve's brother, Brian, was released from prison. Brian allegedly blamed Nanette for the legal issues that led to his incarceration and had made direct threats against her. In response, she urged for additional security measures, having cameras installed around the property and keeping protective tools in her bedroom, car, and purse. She openly shared her fears with her family. Her father and sisters, aware of the escalating tension, were alarmed but did not anticipate just how grave the situation would become. Steve was also concerned and worked with Nanette to increase security. He installed additional cameras, purchased self-defense equipment, and even practiced shooting with her at a local shooting range. However, despite these precautions, the simmering problems in their family did not go away. Behind the facade of a peaceful life, there were bitter family conflicts, growing tensions, and the choices ahead led to unforeseen consequences. On July 14, 2017, at around 2:30 p.m., the St. Tammany Parish Fire Department received an urgent call from Steve's cousin, who lived nearby. He reported seeing thick smoke rising from Steve's property and suspected the house was on fire. Despite the distance between their homes and the dense forest in between, the fire was visible from afar. Steve and his team arrived at the scene around 3 p.m. when the house was engulfed in flames. Firefighters worked into the evening to extinguish the fire, only to discover human remains in the bathroom of the master bedroom. The damage was extensive, but the location of the remains and the fact that no one else lived there indicated the victim was likely Nanette, Steve's wife. No alarms had sounded, and throughout the day, Steve's repeated calls to both Nanette's cell phone and the house landline had gone unanswered. Her car remained in the garage, further confirming she had been home at the time of the fire. Tragically, all the household pets also perished, reflecting the sudden and intense nature of the flames. Federal fire investigation specialists joined the inquiry. Initially, the fire was considered a possible accident, but the circumstances surrounding Nanette's death raised suspicions. Her remains were found in the bathroom, and there was no indication she had tried to escape. This prompted a forensic autopsy, which included DNA testing and an investigation into the cause of death. About a week later, during a memorial service, part of the coroner's preliminary findings became public. It was revealed that Nanette had suffered a gunshot wound to the head, with a bullet found in her skull. This discovery completely shifted the direction of the investigation. On July 18th, the sheriff confirmed the findings, apologized for the delay in communication, and acknowledged evidence of a criminal act. Further autopsy results showed no smoke inhalation in Nanette's lungs, proving that she had died before the fire. Since no weapon was found near her body, the possibility of self-inflicted injuries has been ruled out. The investigation further revealed the presence of 9 security cameras on the property, but Steve stated that the system had stopped functioning several days before the fire. Efforts to recover footage from the damaged equipment were unsuccessful. This lack of evidence, combined with forensic findings, suggested the fire had been intentionally set to destroy evidence. Investigators shifted their focus to individuals who might have had both motive and access to the property. However, an official statement confirming foul play in Nanette's death was not released until 4 days after the fire. The family's frustration with the investigation grew, particularly because the coroner had noted the gunshot wound the day after the incident, yet this information wasn't immediately shared with them. Nanette's sister, Kim, a prosecutor in Nebraska, publicly criticized the investigation, pointing to the lack of proper scene containment, which may have compromised evidence. When Nanette's relatives arrived in Louisiana shortly after the tragedy, they found the property unsecured and the house open. Within 2 days, Steve was allowed to return to the site, raising concerns about evidence being altered or lost. It wasn't until Steve's son, Justin, discovered a fragment of a human skull in the debris that authorities finally secured the scene. The incident has left the public losing confidence in Sheriff Randy Smith's department. While federal investigators conduct an independent analysis, they discovered multiple points of ignition and traces of accelerants, confirming the fire was deliberately set. Despite these findings, however, the sheriff did not rule out the possibility that Julie harmed herself, citing the lack of a recovered weapon and inconclusive ballistics test results. Later, 2 firearms were found in the remains of the home, but neither could be definitively linked to the fatal shot. The bullet recovered from Nanette's skull was too damaged for reliable analysis. Additional forensic tests reinforced previous findings, including finding no smoke in Nanette's lungs and no food in her stomach. Despite her having been seen purchasing food at a fast food restaurant that morning, additional inconsistencies came to light during the investigation. There was no blood on Nanette's gunshot wound to the head, as is often the case, leading to speculation that her body may have been moved after her death. An independent expert suggested that whoever moved her was likely familiar with the layout of the house. The sheriff, however, publicly disputed the forensic expert's conclusions. This discrepancy with the findings of federal agents further undermined public confidence in the investigation. Nanette's family began openly questioning the integrity of local authorities and raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest. As discrepancies mounted, the sheriff was eventually compelled to issue a public statement, acknowledging that Nanette's death resulted from a violent act. Despite this admission, the investigation failed to identify the person responsible. The case shifted towards exploring possible motives and suspects with access to the property. Nanette's husband, Steve, was naturally a key subject of interest due to his unrestricted access to the house. He willingly cooperated, volunteered for a polygraph test, and passed. However, since polygraph results are not entirely reliable, investigators didn't eliminate him as a suspect. Steve's alibi was backed by fire department security footage confirming he was at work on the day of the incident, starting at 8 a.m., and didn't leave at any point, including during lunch. This was corroborated by surveillance footage and his co-workers' testimonies. However, it was noted that Steve, working on a Friday, was unusual, as he usually took that day off. Investigators also analyzed Nanette's movements on the morning of July 14th. Traffic cameras spotted her driving between her home and a nearby fast food restaurant, where her bank card was used to buy food. Her car was later seen near her house. About an hour later, a phone call was made from Nanette's phone to an unfamiliar number. The person on the other end claimed not to know her, and the reason for the call remains unexplained. Investigators explored potential personal conflicts and discovered that Steve had been in an extramarital relationship with a colleague. Nanette was aware of the affair and had told others she was considering divorce, which under state law would involve dividing their shared assets, an arrangement that could have been financially disadvantageous for Steve. When questioned, Steve admitted to the affair but claimed the couple had reconciled and planned to stay together. Close family members were also questioned. Steve's son, Justin, had reportedly experienced tension with his stepmother, Julie. In the past, family acquaintances described him as having unusual interests, including a fascination with firearms. However, Justin provided documentation proving he was out of state for work on the day of the incident, which was verified, ruling him out as a suspect. Investigators also looked into Steve's brother, Brian, who had a criminal record and a history of family conflicts. Over the years, Nanette had voiced concerns about his behavior. Shortly after his release from prison, she sent her sister a message describing a specific threat from him, in which he allegedly displayed aggressiveness and hinted at setting the house on fire. These claims were corroborated through their text exchanges. Surveillance footage from their parents' home showed Brian did not leave the premises on the day of Nanette's death. However, a wearable tracking device issued to him malfunctioned and failed to record any location data that day, with the cause of this failure unexplained. Another puzzling incident occurred a month before Nanette's death. A security camera recorded an unidentified man near the entrance gate of the property. He left behind a cigarette butt and a knife. Nanette informed her father about the incident, but the man's identity remained unclear and no investigation was conducted to find out more. After investigating multiple leads, the case remained unsolved. Every suspect either had a confirmed alibi or there wasn't enough evidence to make a formal accusation, leaving the investigation at a dead end. 2 months after Nanette's death, the sheriff made another public announcement. He declared that Steve was no longer a person of interest in the case, explaining that Steve's alibi had been verified. There was no clear motive, and the evidence was deemed insufficient to move forward. However, Nanette's family felt this announcement was premature, as not all digital records had been reviewed. Several witnesses had yet to be re-interviewed, and a detailed timeline of her phone activity leading up to her death was still incomplete. It appeared the investigation was entering a state of stagnation. When Nanette's family requested access to the case documents, their attempts were met with vague responses. Louisiana state law restricts access to investigative materials to the closest next of kin, which in this case was Steve, not Nanette's parents or sisters. Steve did not share these documents with the rest of the family. In search of answers, Nanette's relatives turned to private attorneys and independent forensic experts. One expert, after examining the available evidence, identified signs of deliberate investigative mismanagement, noting that critical protocols for handling cases involving violent deaths and burnt evidence had been disregarded. The conclusions and methodologies of the private experts sharply contrasted with those of the local authorities. Efforts to transfer the case to a different jurisdiction proved unsuccessful. Appeals to the district attorney's office were dismissed, with officials citing a lack of legal justification to relocate the investigation. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Nanette's family turned to social media, launching a page to provide updates and highlight inconsistencies in the investigation, in the hope of pressuring authorities into action. However, the sheriff's actions became a significant obstacle to achieving transparency. His public statements, dismissal of expert findings, and personal connections to individuals potentially linked to the case raised concerns about his impartiality and deepened public mistrust. Despite multiple individuals with potential motives, the investigation failed to reach a definite conclusion. Detectives worked on verifying alibis, analyzing technical records, and identifying gaps in the official narrative. But these efforts often revealed inconsistencies that undermined the credibility of the evidence. A key issue was the absence of location data from the Jeep's-enabled ankle monitor worn by Brian. On July 14th, the day of the incident, the monitor registered no location data, an unexplained blackout. Authorities were unable to determine whether the failure was a technical error or whether the monitor had been intentionally disabled. This missing data represented a major accountability failure and raised serious questions. Another troubling discovery came from a review of footage from a security camera inside Brian's parents' home. The video depicted Brian with a working desk lamp and a visible wall clock in the background, ostensibly providing an alibi. However, Nanette's family questioned the authenticity of this footage, suggesting it could have been pre-recorded or staged. Experts also observed that the angle and focus of the camera appeared unusual for a standard household surveillance setup. Additional uncertainty arose with surveillance footage from a fast food establishment showing Nanette's vehicle. Investigators assumed she was driving the car that morning, but the video quality was too poor to verify her identity. This assumption was based solely on her bank card being used to make a purchase nearby. The situation was further complicated by the fact that there was no footage from her home surveillance system on the day of the incident. Steve claimed the cameras had not been operational at the time, but investigators later found traces of accelerant on the damaged equipment. Experts concluded that the security system had likely been intentionally tampered with before the fire, suggesting someone with knowledge of the camera's locations and purpose had interfered. After Nanette's father passed away, her sisters took the lead in demanding a proper investigation. They launched an online awareness campaign, collaborated with advocacy groups, and participated in discussions on crime-focused platforms. The family repeatedly urged state authorities to transfer the case to an independent investigative body, but their requests were consistently met with generic responses that lacked meaningful action. They were also frustrated by the investigators' failure to review footage from the citywide surveillance system, which could have offered critical context. These shortcomings formed the basis of formal complaints to the district attorney's office. Although officials promised to keep the case open, there was no evidence of real progress, receiving minimal support from local law enforcement. Nanette's family shifted their focus to building a network of allies. They connected with organizations specializing in unresolved cases, which led to increased attention on Nanette's death through podcasts, videos, and media coverage. By 2024, the case remained unsolved. However, new hope appeared when Colin Sims was elected district attorney. Colin publicly expressed his willingness to review the evidence, marking the first sign of possible investigative progress after nearly 7 years of inaction. As of March 2024, Nanette's case was still open, with no charges filed against any suspects. Despite coroner findings, witness testimonies, and independent assessments, authorities in St. Tammany Parish had yet to identify any responsible parties. What initially seemed like a straightforward case had instead devolved into a prolonged stalemate. By mid-2025, the case records were still sealed, and only individuals with legal standing, such as Nanette's husband, Steve, were granted access. The family remained barred from reviewing complete investigative reports, transcripts, or relevant surveillance data. Repeated appeals to state authorities went unanswered. In response, a grassroots group formed by Nanette's friends and family continued to provide social media updates, urging the public to come forward with any useful information. The family also sought assistance from federal agencies like the Department of Justice. In their letters, they raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest involving local authorities and petitioned for the case to be transferred to a higher jurisdiction. Independent experts consulted by the family identified numerous investigative avenues that had not been fully explored, including recovering deleted digital records and re-interviewing key witnesses. However, without official investigative authority, these proposals could not be enforced. Despite years of stagnation, Nanette's family has never stopped fighting for answers. For them, this is about more than personal grief. It is a pursuit of justice. The lack of progress has only strengthened their resolve. They firmly believe the truth can still be uncovered if independent expertise is brought in and the case is reviewed impartially. As of this report, the case remains open but inactive. Nanette Krentel's story highlights how errors, delays, and possible bias can obstruct justice in a major case. Yet, it also demonstrates the unwavering resilience of a family determined to keep her memory alive. Their goal remains unchanged: to uncover the truth, no matter how much time has passed or how many obstacles stand in their way. The mother of two disappeared mysteriously, she sending alarming messages to her family before she vanished. Police began investigating immediately, trying to understand conflicting information. However, the investigation took an unexpected turn, revealing a shocking story that would captivate the nation. Katie Kenyon was born in Burnley, a small town in Britain. She had two very close sisters. Even as a child, Katie was known for her kindness and generosity, always willing to help others. Later, she married and had 2 children, a son and a daughter. Sadly, her husband left, and although he occasionally visited the children, Katie raised them on her own. It was difficult, as her job as a social care worker didn't pay much, but Katie always made sure her children had everything they needed. On April 22, 2022, 33-year-old Katie followed her normal morning routine, preparing her children for school and sending them off. Later that day, around noon, Katie's mother received a strange text message from her. Katie stated she needed to get away for a while to clear her head. Her mother immediately tried calling her, but the call went directly to voicemail. The idea that she would abandon everything, especially her children, seemed completely out of character. Katie's mother contacted Katie's sister, Sarah Kenyon Holden. They rushed over to her house and noticed that her car was gone. Using a spare key, they let themselves inside and found all of Katie's belongings right where she'd left them. except for her phone and handbag. It just didn't add up. The idea that Katie had taken off somewhere, leaving behind almost everything she owned, felt completely wrong. Something was off. Soon after, Katie's children arrived home from school and shared something concerning. They had both received odd text messages, supposedly from their mother. In the texts, Katie stated she needed help to become a better mother and instructed them to contact their father to care for them during her absence. Upon reading these messages, Sarah immediately suspected they weren't written by her. Firstly, the tone was unlike Katie's usual way of speaking. More significantly, the word "while" was misspelled in both texts, which was highly unusual for Katie, as she never made such errors. Katie had mentioned Andrew Burfield, Katie's ex-boyfriend of several years, in messages to her children, saying he would care for them if their father couldn't. Sarah contacted Andrew. He told her he hadn't seen Katie since the previous day because he'd been at work. He stated that Katie texted him around 2 p.m. that day, informing him that she was leaving her car, keys, and bank card in his mailbox. Andrew claimed this was to repay the £6,000 she owed him for past anxiety treatment. However, Sarah completely disbelieved Andrew's account. Katie's son then mentioned that Andrew had contacted him on social media. Andrew's message stated that Katie had checked into a clinic and asked him to care for her dog until she returned. This struck Katie's mother and Sarah as odd. While they knew Katie and Andrew had a long, turbulent relationship, they believed it was over. Therefore, it seemed strange that Katie would inform Andrew of her plans while neglecting to tell her own mother or children. So, Sarah and her boyfriend decided to drive over to Andrew's place and investigate. The moment they pulled up, she spotted Katie's car parked outside. Inside, she could see Katie's purse and other personal belongings, which only heightened her suspicion. She knocked on Andrew's door, hoping to talk to him face to face, but he refused to open it and told them to leave. The whole thing felt incredibly off. Sarah didn't understand why Andrew seemed so uncooperative. Her boyfriend ended up threatening to kick the door down if he didn't let them in, but Andrew just called the police instead. A few minutes later, officers arrived and spoke with Katie's sister first. She laid everything out, how the family was worried sick, and how they didn't believe for a second that Katie would just vanish without saying a word to anyone. She also pointed out her sister's car still parked there with her stuff inside. After that, the police knocked on Andrew's door. He gave them the same story he told over the phone, that he'd been at work when Katie texted him about leaving her car, keys, and bank card, and said she was going to check herself into a clinic. He even let them search his house and his van, and they didn't find anything suspicious. So, the police left, but they did open a missing persons case. Just to cover all bases, they called around to a bunch of clinics, hoping maybe Katie really had checked herself in somewhere, but not a single one had seen her. The next morning, police began piecing together a timeline of Katie's disappearance. And naturally, all eyes were on Andrew's house, since that's where her car had been found. Detectives learned there was a surveillance camera nearby, so they pulled the footage from the previous couple of days. On April 21st, the day before Katie went missing, she was seen pulling up to Andrew's house. The footage showed her getting into his van, kissing him and smiling. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But the next morning, at 9:20 a.m., things took a very different turn. That was the day Andrew told police he'd been at work when Katie supposedly dropped off her car, but the footage showed otherwise. It clearly showed Katie arriving at his house, getting out of her car and climbing into the passenger seat of Andrew's van. And right there behind the wheel was Andrew himself. Police immediately checked traffic cameras along the direction the van had gone. This time, the van stopped at a McDonald's, then headed out toward the highway. The final footage showed Andrew turning onto a rural back road leading into a wooded area. After that, the van disappeared from view for nearly an hour, but then it popped up again. This time, though, there was only one person in the vehicle. So, now, a much darker picture was starting to form. Based on the footage, it looked like Andrew had driven Katie out to a wooded area and then left without her. the police pulled location data from Katie's phone on the day she went missing. The record showed that her phone disconnected from the tower near her house early that morning, then reconnected near Andrew's home. From there, the phone's path followed the exact route the van had taken. According to the location data, Katie's phone was still in the van as it headed back towards Andrew's place. The problem was Katie was no longer in the van. And then came the final piece. Investigators checked the time those strange messages were sent to Katie's mom and kids. And by that point, Andrew had already returned home alone. But location data clearly showed that those texts were sent from his house. Given that all the evidence directly contradicted Andrew's version of events, police decided to head back to his house. The moment they stepped inside, something felt off. The place was boiling hot. Turns out Andrew had fired up the wood, burning stove, despite the weather being pretty mild outside. Right away, detectives suspected he might have been trying to destroy some evidence. But by the time they got there, all that was left in the stove was ash. Even so, they arrested Andrew and brought him in for questioning. Surprisingly, he didn't seem nervous at all. In fact, he looked completely relaxed and stuck to his original story, claiming Katie had probably checked herself into a clinic to deal with her anxiety. When detectives started pressing for more answers, he shut down completely and said he wouldn't talk without a lawyer. So, once again, they were left with nothing. After the interrogation, police decided to launch a large-scale search operation in the forest, where Katie's phone had last pinged right before Andrew was seen driving back alone. Covering that area, however, wasn't an easy task. They were looking at roughly 25 miles of rugged terrain. Still, they pulled in dozens of officers, requested backup from other agencies, and headed out into the woods. Soon they had helicopters with thermal imaging, drones, specialized equipment, and even a team of divers. Volunteers joined in too. The search quickly became one of the biggest operations their town had ever seen. But even with all that manpower, it still wasn't enough to cover such a huge area. Then, out of nowhere, police got a tip. Someone had seen Andrew's van parked in a specific part of the forest. That changed everything. Now that they had a likely spot, they were able to narrow the search down to a 5-mile radius. As the search teams combed through the forest, detectives brought Andrew in for another round of questioning. This time, they laid out the surveillance footage and other evidence they had gathered. Faced with the facts, Andrew changed his story. He admitted that he and Katie had driven out to the woods, but what he said next left investigators baffled. According to Andrew, the two of them went there to have a picnic. He claimed Katie had a habit of writing down her thoughts in a journal and then burning the pages as a way to let go of things that were bothering her. He insisted that morning had been no different. They had a picnic, lit a small fire. She burned a few pages, and then he drove home. He said he didn't know what happened to Katie after that. Of course, detectives didn't buy Andrew's story, but the problem was they still didn't have any solid leads. The search teams had come up empty, and with no trace of Katie in the woods, investigators shifted their focus to her relationship with Andrew. According to Katie's family, she had met him 3 years earlier. He had 2 kids from a previous marriage, worked in construction, and at first he seemed like a reliable, stable guy. But it didn't take long for her loved ones to notice cracks in the relationship. Andrew had a habit of trying to control Katie, telling her how to act, how to talk, even how to think. He also constantly brought up her anxiety, using it as a way to dismiss anything she said or did that he didn't like. And over time, that pressure only made her anxiety worse. Eventually, Andrew offered to pay for her treatment, and Katie agreed. But as time went on, things just kept getting worse. The fights became more frequent, more intense. Eventually, the relationship fell apart. For Katie, breaking up felt like a weight off her shoulders, but for Andrew, it was something he just couldn't accept. Not long after they split, Katie discovered someone had slashed the tires on her car. She was certain it was Andrew, but she never reported it to the police. A few months before Katie went missing, she got a letter from the court saying she owed Andrew £4,000 British. the amount he'd spent on her treatment, Katie was already struggling to cover basic expenses for her and her kids. She had no idea how she'd come up with that kind of money. Over time, late fees piled on, and the debt grew to £6,000. The whole situation sent her anxiety through the roof. She was terrified she'd lose her home, the only stable place her kids had. But more than anything, she was afraid of Andrew. In one message to her mom, Katie said she was scared of him and genuinely believed he might hurt her. Still, just a month before she disappeared, Andrew reached out to her. He told her he regretted ever taking her to court. He promised to drop the case and even said he'd pay all the extra fees that had built up since the ruling. Andrew apologized for his anger, told her he wanted to change, and eventually Katie forgave him. Despite everything, they got back together. Still, detectives found something even more disturbing. Just one day after Andrew promised to fix everything with the court, he actually called the debt collectors and told them to go harder on Katie. He wanted them to push her even more. Investigators believe this was all part of his plan to increase the pressure on her, making her even more dependent on him. Katie, of course, had no idea this was happening because Andrew kept telling her he was working on canceling the whole thing. This gave detectives an even darker picture of the situation. All the evidence pointed to one conclusion: Andrew was a skilled manipulator and a compulsive liar who would do anything to get his way. Soon, detectives received further confirmation of this theory. People who knew him corroborated this, telling investigators that Andrew had a knack for getting inside people's heads and controlling them, something he had been doing for years, even with those closest to him. Despite all this, police still had no clue where Katie was. The search dragged on, day after day, without a trace. But then, finally, investigators caught a break. A local man came forward with a strange story. He said that the morning after Katie went missing, Andrew randomly showed up at his house. They were strangers, but Andrew approached him and asked a bizarre question. "Do you know when your bins were last emptied?" This immediately raised red flags. Officers rushed to the man's property and discovered that the trash bins hadn't been collected in several days. They started digging through the garbage, and inside one of the bags, they found something chilling: sandals stained with blood. A DNA test confirmed the blood was Katie's. At that point, detectives were certain of one thing: Katie was dead, and Andrew was officially charged with her murder. But a huge problem remained. They had no idea where her body was. Shortly after being formally charged, Andrew told detectives he wanted to talk. He changed his story yet again. This time, Andrew claimed he and Katie had gone to the woods that morning for a picnic. While sitting by a fire, Katie supposedly spotted a hatchet he'd used to chop wood and jokingly dared him to throw it at a soda can she was holding a few feet away. Andrew said he accepted the dare, but as he threw the hatchet, Katie suddenly leaned forward, and it struck her in the back of the head. Of course, detectives didn't believe a word of it, but this time, Andrew at least admitted the location of her body. He claimed that when Katie collapsed and died, he panicked. There was no cell service in that part of the forest, and he said he didn't have the strength to carry her back to the van. So, he decided to bury her there to prevent animals from getting to her body. He said he dug a shallow grave, placed Katie's body inside, and covered it with leaves and branches, marking the spot by tying a plastic bag to a stick, planning to return later. He also admitted to burning Katie's phone and some of her other belongings in his fireplace, then scooping up the charred remains and dumping them in a trash bin somewhere around town. After speaking with Andrew, police returned to his house, hoping to uncover new evidence. This time, forensic experts managed to find traces of Katie's blood inside his washing machine. Meanwhile, the search for Katie's body continued. Investigators focused on locating the stick with the plastic bag Andrew claimed he'd used to mark the burial site. But even with that clue, search teams couldn't find the exact spot. While the search was underway, detectives uncovered something else. After investigating Andrew's online activity, they found that he'd been communicating with numerous women on various dating sites, flirting with practically anyone who responded. He'd even been seeing at least one woman in person. According to their conversations, Andrew had told her he owned multiple properties across the country. They were even discussing moving to Scotland together and buying a house. But that wasn't the most significant discovery. As they continued examining his phone, investigators discovered something that changed everything. Based on GPS data, the day before Katie vanished, Andrew had stopped by his parents' house, then turned off his phone for about an hour and a half. During that time, his van was captured on several surveillance cameras heading toward the woods. After speaking to Andrew's parents, police learned that the morning before Katie went missing, he'd borrowed a shovel. That's when it clicked. Andrew had likely gone to the woods that day to dig her grave in advance. The next day, after killing Katie and using her phone to message her kids and family, Andrew also texted his other girlfriend using his own phone, telling her that something had come up with his kids and that he'd have to cancel their date. But there was more. In the Notes app on his phone, investigators found something even more disturbing: drafts of the exact same messages he'd sent to Katie's children and mother. Digital forensics showed that he'd been editing those drafts over several weeks, tweaking them repeatedly to match Katie's writing style so no one would suspect anything. Most tellingly, the word "while" was misspelled in the exact same way it appeared in the final messages. It's also important to note that the note had been created over a month before the murder, proving one thing beyond any doubt: Andrew didn't just snap. He'd been planning this for weeks, perhaps even longer, carefully laying the groundwork for something he knew he was going to do. When police confronted Andrew with the evidence that he'd been in the woods the day before the murder, he claimed he had only gone there to walk his dog, not to dig a grave. Soon after, search teams finally found the stick and the plastic bag Andrew had mentioned, but there was no grave anywhere nearby. They scoured the area inch by inch, but came up empty-handed. On April 29th, the detectives brought Andrew out to the woods and asked him to show them exactly where he had buried Katie. Once they arrived, Andrew pointed to a specific patch of ground. The ground looked completely undisturbed, flat, smooth, and totally natural. There were no signs of digging, no shifted soil, nothing out of place. It had been concealed so well that officers later admitted they would never have found it without Andrew's help. As soon as the forensic team began digging, they found Katie. But what they uncovered next was unexpected. Andrew had somehow managed to bury her beneath a web of tree roots growing deep underground. Later, a geology expert explained the complexity of the grave. According to him, it would have taken hours to dig something like that, meaning Andrew had clearly come back more than once. The expert also pointed out that Andrew had separated the soil by layers, then buried them back in the correct order, which explained why the grave looked so untouched. That level of planning was chilling. Katie's body was handed over to forensic examiners. Immediately, Andrew's story about the Coke can and the axe throw fell apart. Katie had died from blows to the head with a hatchet, not just 1 or 2, but 12 times. By that point, there was no doubt in the detectives' minds. This wasn't an accident. This was cold, calculated, and premeditated murder. With all of that evidence, the prosecution began preparing for trial. The case against Andrew was overwhelming, more than enough to secure a conviction. But one thing remained unclear: the motive. Investigators believed Andrew was fueled by bitterness and resentment. Katie had broken up with him months earlier, and it seemed his ego couldn't handle the rejection. That bruised pride, they believed, turned into hatred and ultimately led him to kill her. The trial began in November 2022, and at first, Andrew pleaded not guilty. But just 3 days in, he suddenly changed course. Out of nowhere, he reversed his plea and admitted to the murder. Unfortunately for Katie's family, he didn't offer any new details. He simply accepted responsibility, but it was still enough. In the end, the court sentenced Andrew Burfield to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 32 years, calling him a deeply dangerous individual. The case was officially closed. The car had gone off the road and landed in a ditch. At first, it was quiet, but then smoke began to rise. Inside, A woman wasn't moving. Her husband stood outside, simply watching. He didn't call for help. Malcolm John Webster was born on April 18, 1959, in Wandsworth, Greater London. On the surface, his background appeared stable, even enviable. His father, Alexander Robertson Webster, held a high-ranking position within the Metropolitan Police, serving as a detective chief superintendent in the fraud squad. His mother, Odette Blewett, had once worked as a nurse, but gave up her profession to raise their children behind closed doors. However, the family home was governed by unrelenting discipline and an unsettling set of rules. Alexander ran the household with absolute control. When he used the bathroom, everyone else had to vacate the house. Meals were taken in silence unless he initiated a conversation. Emotional warmth was rare, and affection was nearly absent. Major family decisions, including financial matters, were handled solely by Alexander. From an early age, Malcolm displayed troubling signs. While his twin sister, Caroline, easily made friends, Malcolm struggled to connect, but rather than withdraw quietly, he developed unusual ways of attracting attention. He began pretending to faint, often collapsing at convenient moments to avoid chores or responsibilities. His apparent health issues led to speculative diagnoses, ranging from asthma to epilepsy. Yet, no solid medical explanation was ever confirmed. Doctors prescribed medications based on symptoms, never seeking a definitive cause. As sympathy began to fade, Malcolm escalated his attention-seeking behavior. He became fascinated with fire, setting small blazes in school and earning the nickname Pyro from classmates. Though these incidents never resulted in formal charges, they left other parents uneasy. Children were warned to stay away from him, and isolation became his norm. At home, comparisons with his more sociable sister only deepened his resentment. His parents, hoping to give him a fresh start, enrolled him in a private boys' school. Initially, Malcolm appeared to flourish. He joined the drama club, improved his grades, and reinvented himself. He claimed his family was wealthy and well-connected, but his lies eventually caught up with him, and once again, trust in him eroded. At 15, Malcolm was pulled out of school. He didn't resist. Education no longer interested him. He wanted independence and income. In his early career, he struggled to find work he enjoyed. He drifted from job to job, including garbage collection, fruit picking, and retail. But none of these roles gave him a sense of purpose or satisfaction. At 17, guided by his mother, Malcolm began training as a nurse. Surprisingly, he thrived and began a serious relationship, which ended suddenly due to a terminated pregnancy and the resulting emotional distress. However, Malcolm persevered. When he was 30, Malcolm worked in Tawam Hospital, on the children's ward in Abu Dhabi, UAE. It was here that his criminal tendencies surfaced. Trusted by elderly residents, he volunteered to manage their finances, only to siphon off their savings for personal luxuries, including rounds of drinks and expensive golf equipment. When that scam lost steam, he shifted tactics. He started targeting older, wealthier women. His charm was disarming, and his lies were convincing. Posing as a struggling young man with tales of hardship, he extracted money and gifts with calculated precision. In the late 1980s, within months, 3 children with special needs died under his care. Each suffered sudden cardiac arrests. There were no signs of illness beforehand, no medical warning signs. Though no autopsies were conducted, whispers began circulating among the staff. But in a region where autopsies were culturally discouraged, no investigations followed. Malcolm simply left the country without consequences. Back in the UK, he resumed his life as though nothing had happened. He found work as a nurse and began cultivating his social image once more. At a party, he met a woman named Claire Morris. She was born on December 26, 1961, just 2 years after Malcolm. She grew up in a secure, affluent household and had a younger brother named Peter Morris. Claire was the kind of person who lit up a room, outgoing, confident, and full of energy. She was popular because of her lively personality. One evening, she met Malcolm at a party, and he was immediately drawn to her charm. Claire represented everything he admired: warmth, vitality, and a strong sense of self. The two struck up a conversation and quickly began spending time together. On the surface, their relationship progressed naturally, but beneath the surface, doubts quietly stirred. Claire's mother, Betty Morris, had reservations from the beginning. There was something about Malcolm that didn't sit right with her. Though she couldn't quite articulate it, her instincts whispered caution. Peter, on the other hand, initially welcomed Malcolm into the family, finding him clever and polite, perhaps a bit of a rogue, but nothing more. From Malcolm's perspective, Claire was radiant. His twin sister Caroline described Claire as generous and kind-hearted, someone who brought genuine happiness into her brother's life. Even Odette, Malcolm's emotionally distant mother, spoke positively of her. For once, it seemed Malcolm had found a partner who might steer his life in the right direction. They married on September 3rd, 1993. The ceremony was beautiful. Claire looked radiant, and Malcolm performed his role to perfection. The devoted husband, charming and attentive. Friends and family left the celebration believing they had a bright future ahead of them. Young, in love, and financially stable, everything appeared idyllic. But everything changed just 9 months later. On May 27, 1994, tragedy struck. Malcolm and Claire had been driving along a quiet rural road, with Malcolm at the wheel and Claire beside him. According to his account, a motorcyclist suddenly appeared on the wrong side of the road, forcing him to swerve. He claimed to have overcorrected, sending the vehicle into a ditch. Moments later, the car burst into flames. Malcolm escaped. Claire did not. He was taken to hospital and kept under observation for a week. He complained of pain, appeared emotionally broken, and wore a neck brace. But scans and medical tests showed no significant injuries. There were no broken bones, no burns, and no smoke inhalation. His physical condition was inconsistent with the violent wreckage he described. At Claire's funeral, Malcolm appeared inconsolable, barely able to speak. Peter held his hand throughout the ceremony, unaware that the man he was comforting would later spend Claire's life insurance payout, £200,000, an enormous sum in 1994 on a £30,000 yacht, a new Range Rover, and other lavish expenses. The money vanished quickly. Questions began to surface. Why hadn't Claire managed to escape the car, as Malcolm had investigators confirmed that while the car had veered off the road, the crash hadn't been severe. It wasn't traveling at high speed, and the damage didn't suggest a violent impact. The fire's origin remained unknown. Even more troubling was that when Malcolm phoned for help, he told dispatchers the vehicle was empty. Despite his wife being inside, he never mentioned Claire. Despite these troubling details, no formal charges were ever brought. The case was closed, and Malcolm's life continued undisturbed by suspicion. Behind the scenes, he had already moved on. Soon after Claire's death, Malcolm began a secret affair with Geraldine Oakley, a hospital IT manager. Publicly, he was a grieving widower trying to rebuild his life. Privately, Geraldine began noticing unusual behavior. Malcolm talked about Claire's death in unsettlingly clinical terms, often circling back to whether a second autopsy would be ordered. His cold fascination with the topic disturbed her deeply. Geraldine confided her concerns to a consultant pathologist. She feared there was more to Claire's death than anyone realized. Eventually, unable to reconcile her suspicions with their relationship, Geraldine walked away. Unfazed, Malcolm shifted locations once again. By 1995, he was living in Saudi Arabia. There, he connected with a woman named Brenda Grant over the phone. They eventually met in person a few times, but the friendship ended abruptly when, according to Brenda, Malcolm offered her illegal substances, an offer she firmly declined. After his stay in Saudi Arabia, Malcolm relocated once more, this time crossing hemispheres entirely and settling in New Zealand in the mid-1990s. No longer working as a nurse, he presented himself as a computer specialist. At a dinner party that month, he met Felicity Drum, a bright, outgoing cancer nurse. She was intelligent, well-spoken, and 3 years younger than Malcolm. Her personality was magnetic, polished, lively, and full of warmth. For a man like Malcolm, she was the perfect mark. He played the role to perfection, attentive, affectionate, and emotionally present. To Felicity, he seemed sensitive and grounded, often speaking of life's fragility and how important it was not to waste time. Within months, they were inseparable. By January 1997, Malcolm had proposed. They married that April in Auckland, and for their honeymoon, they retreated to the idyllic Bay of Islands. But amid the calm beaches and scenic beauty, a far darker undercurrent began to emerge. Felicity later recounted one disturbing episode from the trip. She drank a cup of tea, prepared by Malcolm, and fell into a deep, unnatural sleep that lasted nearly 36 hours. It wasn't a one-off. In the months that followed, she experienced troubling health issues, double vision, unsteadiness, periods of confusion, and extended bouts of sleep, all suspiciously occurring after eating or drinking something provided by her husband. When she raised her concerns, Malcolm dismissed them as stress-related. Doctors were consulted, but none could pinpoint the cause. Tests showed abnormal liver function, usually associated with substance abuse or medication toxicity, neither of which applied to Felicity, who lived a healthy lifestyle. Still, Malcolm continued preparing all her meals, always at her side, always in control. Their home life soon took on a sinister pattern. Fires began to follow them. One broke out at Felicity's parents' house while the couple was staying there, another at a rental cottage, and a third at a property they were considering purchasing. These accidents left Felicity uneasy, but she brushed them off until Malcolm encouraged her to take out a life insurance policy. She agreed. In 1998, they welcomed a son. From the outside, it looked like a happy family. Malcolm was attentive, affectionate, and often seen doting on his child, but his affection masked a growing deception. In early 1999, Felicity and Malcolm planned to purchase a home in Auckland. Malcolm repeatedly stalled the payment, claiming the funds from a UK bank transfer hadn't cleared. As the February 12th deadline approached, the pressure mounted. That day, Malcolm and Felicity headed to the bank together. During the drive, Malcolm began complaining about the car's steering. Then, without warning, the vehicle veered across 2 lanes and slammed into a ditch. Felicity grabbed the wheel in panic and found it responsive. Nothing about the car's handling felt off. Malcolm got out of the car and asked her to stay put. However, she disobeyed and got out to call the bank, probably to reschedule their meeting. Just a week after the crash, Malcolm arranged a picnic in a remote area. During the drive, the couple argued, nothing major. Then, in an apparent peace offering, Malcolm handed her a bottle of water. Moments later, Felicity passed out. She awoke hours later in the passenger seat, disoriented and groggy. The car was now deep within a forest. Her phone rang. It was her father, worried after not hearing from her. When Malcolm returned to the car and saw her awake, he looked startled, alarmed even. He climbed into the car, tense, and asked how she had managed to regain consciousness. Felicity didn't know. Her head spun. Her memory was foggy, but one thing was clear. Something was terribly wrong. She demanded he take her home immediately. Back at the house, with her senses returning, she started asking questions. Why had they been in the middle of the forest? What had caused her to pass out? Malcolm dodged her inquiries. Then he suddenly clutched his chest and claimed he might be having a heart attack. He rushed off, allegedly heading to the hospital. Hours later, he returned with an astonishing announcement. Doctors had diagnosed him with leukemia, but this was no cry for help. It was a distraction. Felicity's father had already harbored suspicions about his son-in-law. After speaking to the family solicitor, Felicity's father began investigating Malcolm's finances. What he found changed everything. Together, father and daughter searched through Malcolm's belongings and discovered a key to a private mailbox. Inside were damning documents. A bank statement showed that Malcolm had secretly moved 140,000 New Zealand dollars from a joint account into a personal one in Aberdeenshire. Credit card bills revealed he was drowning in debt. Felicity's father took immediate action, securing a court injunction that legally barred Malcolm from the family home. By the time it was served, Malcolm had vanished. He fled New Zealand just as Felicity began to uncover the full scope of the betrayal. Medical tests later confirmed what she had feared. Her body contained dangerously high levels of sedatives, drugs she had never knowingly taken. Once Malcolm was gone, the symptoms vanished as if they'd never existed. The man she had loved, trusted, and married had slowly and methodically poisoned her. Her suspicions, once only instinct, had now hardened into certainty. While searching through their shared email account, Felicity uncovered damning messages to a UK estate agent. Malcolm had been posing as a single father, planning a quiet relocation to Cornwall with their son. He was arranging to move by the end of 1999. He arranged to move out at the end of 1999. Not a word of this was shared with Felicity. Then came a discovery that changed everything. In the boot of the car Malcolm had abandoned, she found a petrol canister. It was the final piece. A horrifying realization dawned. He had intended to replicate the exact circumstances of his first wife, Claire's death. The plan had almost succeeded until her father's well-timed phone call had inadvertently saved her life. Felicity now understood the forest, the unconsciousness, the steering failure, the sedatives. It had all been part of a carefully rehearsed script. She managed to confront Malcolm once. Calmly, she told him she knew what he had tried to do. His reply chilled her to the bone. "You would have died happy." That sentence shattered any lingering doubts. Malcolm hadn't just deceived and manipulated her. He had plotted her death with methodical precision. For Felicity, the illusion was destroyed. She now knew she had married a murderer. She went straight to the police. In July 2000, New Zealand authorities issued 4 arrest warrants against Malcolm Webster. The charges were severe, including arson, drugging his wife, and administering substances with intent to cause harm. But Malcolm was already gone, having fled the country before he could face justice. From that point on, he was officially a wanted man. As the investigation unfolded, more details emerged. Felicity had only been aware of one life insurance policy, but Malcolm had secretly forged 8 more, with a combined value nearing $2 million New Zealand dollars. His motivation had always been clear: control, deception, and financial gain, no matter the cost. What he did next was true to form. In 2000, Malcolm slipped back into the United Kingdom. He confessed nothing to his family and resumed life as if nothing had happened. He found work, played the role of a respectable man, and once again sought out wealthy women. In August 2004, he met Simone Banerjee at a hospital. He worked in nurse administration. She managed the surgical theater. The two soon became a couple. By 2006, they were engaged. To Simone, Malcolm was a sensitive soul. He shared stories about his supposed battle with leukemia, disappearing for hours and claiming he'd been undergoing treatment. He told her of his tragic past, including the accidental death of his first wife, Claire. He even claimed certain television scenes fires. Car crashes were too traumatic to watch. Simone believed him. She had no idea he was still legally married to Felicity Drum, or that he was a fugitive in New Zealand, or that he had already tried to murder 2 women. But police hadn't stopped tracking him and found him living openly in Aberdeen under his real name. Simone might never have learned the truth had authorities not contacted her directly, warning her of the grave danger she was in. At first, she refused to believe it, but when she confronted Malcolm, he turned pale, packed a bag, mumbled an apology, and walked out. Malcolm Webster was arrested in July 2007 in Scotland. The investigation, known as Operation Field, became an international effort involving over 1,000 witness interviews across multiple countries. Prosecutors charged him with the murder of Claire Morris, the attempted murder of Felicity Drum, and attempting to marry Simone Banerjee under false pretenses to gain access to her estate. As part of the reopened case, Claire's body was exhumed. Forensic analysis revealed that, like Felicity, she had been heavily sedated before her death. This confirmed what many had suspected. Claire hadn't been able to escape the burning car because Malcolm had drugged her, incapacitating her. It was also revealed that Felicity was drugged, even while she was pregnant with their son. The trial would go down in Scottish legal history. It became the longest trial involving a single defendant the country had ever seen. In May 2011, Malcolm Webster was found guilty on all charges. On July 5, 2011, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 30 years. Simone later described herself as lucky to be alive. The courtroom testimonies painted a portrait of a man who used trust as a weapon, staging car crashes, setting fires, poisoning those closest to him, and weaving webs of lies for profit. Psychologists diagnosed him with narcissistic personality disorder, manipulative, deceitful, and utterly lacking in empathy. Even after his conviction, Malcolm refused to accept responsibility. In December 2013, he applied to the Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission, hoping to have his sentence overturned. The process dragged on, but in February 2016, his request was officially rejected. The High Court saw no grounds for an appeal. After a comprehensive investigation into the events of Malcolm Webster's life, the authorities discovered that he had carried out a series of systematic and calculated crimes, mainly for financial gain, through fraud and murder. The investigation, known as Operation Field, spanned 5 years and involved interviews with more than 1,000 witnesses across several countries, revealing a terrifying pattern of manipulation. Malcolm poisoned his first wife, Claire Morris, with temazepam before staging a car crash in 1994 to collect $200,000 in insurance money, spending lavishly on a yacht and a Range Rover. He continued to poison his second wife, Felicity Drum, even when she was pregnant, and forged 9 insurance policies worth $750,000 while also setting 3 fires at her parents' home, a rented house, and a property he intended to buy. Authorities also discovered that Malcolm had attempted to enter into a sham marriage with Simone Banerjee to gain her wealth, with plans to drown her in a boat accident. He also had other relationships, including with Christina Willis, Anne Hancock, and a 15-year-old girl who ended up having an abortion, all of which he either deceived or exploited financially. In Abu Dhabi, Malcolm was suspected of injecting insulin to kill 3 children in his care, although evidence was lacking due to a culture that discouraged autopsies. He had lied about having cancer as a teenager, foreshadowing a decades-long scam. After his arrest in 2007, a search of Simone's home revealed stolen laptops and unlicensed guns. Malcolm was convicted in 2011 of murder, attempted murder, arson, burglary, fraud, poisoning, and attempted marriage fraud, removed from the nursing register in 2013, and attacked in prison, where he hired a hitman to protect him. These revelations exposed a manipulative psychopath diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder who showed no remorse even after being sentenced to life in prison. Malcolm Webster is currently serving his life sentence at a prison in Lanarkshire, Scotland. Caitlin Coons first met Jonathan Jones when she was only 15 years old, and he was 30. Their relationship would soon spiral into something deeply troubling. Caitlin, who had spent much of her young life in Ohio's foster care system, she was living in a group home in Canton when she first encountered Jonathan. She had faced numerous challenges throughout her childhood, bouncing between foster families and care facilities. She desperately seeking stability and someone who would truly care for her. Like many children in state custody, she had experienced multiple placements, each bringing its own disappointments. These constant moves had left her feeling abandoned, creating deep emotional wounds that made her vulnerable. Caitlin couldn't help but hope that each new placement would provide the loving, stable environment she craved, but these hopes were repeatedly dashed. Jonathan, 15 years her senior, seemed to offer the attention and affection that Caitlin had been searching for. However, their relationship was far from appropriate or legal. At 30, Jonathan was a grown man who should have known better than to pursue a romantic relationship with a 15-year-old girl. Caitlin couldn't help but be drawn to someone who appeared to understand her struggles and offered her the emotional connection she had been craving. What she didn't realize was that she was becoming involved with a predatory man who would ultimately lead her down a dark and destructive path. As their relationship developed, it became increasingly clear that Jonathan was taking advantage of Caitlin's vulnerable state. Caitlin's unstable past made her emotionally vulnerable, and she became dependent on Jonathan, who took advantage of her youth and desire for love. Jonathan manipulated Caitlin by exploiting her weaknesses. He told her she was mature, different, and their relationship was special. These tactics are commonly used by predators to make victims feel responsible for their own exploitation. Jonathan had complete control, and Caitlin became isolated, making it difficult for her to see that she was being manipulated and believed their relationship was genuine. Even though there were clear warning signs, her longing for love and inexperience with healthy relationships blinded her to the fact that she was being victimized. She saw Jonathan as her rescuer, the one finally giving her the love she desired. In March 2023, Jonathan's predatory behavior was exposed when he was convicted of enticing a child to view adult material and child endangerment. The court found that he had engaged in intimate with 15-year-old Caitlin and planned to sell photographs of their encounters. This revealed the extent of his exploitation and abuse. After the conviction, the court had ordered him to stay away from Caitlin and put a GPS tracker on him to monitor his location. Despite these efforts, tragedy was unavoidable. Nicole Jones, Jonathan's 53-year-old mother, lived in Sylvania Township. She was very worried about her son's relationship with the teenage girl, Caitlin. She was concerned about Jonathan's legal problems and the negative impact the relationship was having on both of them. As a caring mother, Nicole had seen her adult son making increasingly bad choices. She had tried to support him, but his relationship with a teenager and the resulting legal issues were almost too much to bear. Nicole felt stuck between her love for her son and her duty to protect a vulnerable young girl. The seriousness of the situation and the potential consequences of Jonathan's actions made her even more anxious. As a mother, Nicole had always tried to see the best in Jonathan, even when his behavior was clearly problematic. However, his relationship with Caitlin represented a new level of concern. The teenage girl was undeniably vulnerable and traumatized, and Jonathan appeared to be exploiting someone who needed protection. Nicole felt a sense of responsibility, not only for her son's actions, but also for Caitlin's welfare. She had repeatedly talked to Jonathan about the inappropriate nature of his relationship, pointing out the age difference and legal ramifications. She remained steadfast in her belief that Jonathan needed to end the relationship and seek help for the issues driving him to pursue someone so young and vulnerable. In April 2023, despite the court order, Caitlin made the fateful decision to leave her foster care placement in Canton. The 17-year-old girl, still deeply attached to Jonathan, couldn't resist what she believed was love. She met Jonathan at a local restaurant, and together they returned to his mother's home in Sylvania Township. Caitlin hoped this reunion would somehow make everything better, that they could find a way to be together without further problems. Nicole didn't know that Caitlin was secretly living in her house. Caitlin had climbed in through Jonathan's bedroom window and was hiding from Nicole. This created a stressful and difficult situation, as Caitlin was living a secret life in Nicole's home, where Nicole was trying to live normally. This situation put a strain on everyone. Nicole was unaware of everything happening in her own home, and it was becoming harder to keep Caitlin hidden. Caitlin had to stay quiet during the day and avoid being seen. Caitlin grew frustrated with the secrecy and the constant fear of being discovered, and she realized that this situation couldn't last. As days passed, the strain of keeping Caitlin's presence hidden became increasingly difficult. Jonathan knew it was only a matter of time before his mother discovered Caitlin's presence, and he knew his mother would not approve. It was evident that Nicole was genuinely concerned about both Jonathan's welfare and Caitlin's. However, her attempts to intervene and protect them would ultimately put her in grave danger. The tension in the household reached a breaking point when Caitlin became convinced that Nicole was the primary obstacle to her being with Jonathan. Warped by trauma and manipulation, Caitlin was unable to see that Nicole's concerns were legitimate and protective. Instead, she viewed Nicole as an enemy deliberately trying to destroy her relationship. This perception fueled increasingly dark thoughts about how to eliminate the perceived obstacle. On April 19, 2023, Caitlin's frustration and desperation reached a dangerous crescendo. She made a decision that would forever change multiple lives. Caitlin gave Jonathan an ultimatum that was both shocking and terrifying in its cold calculation. Jonathan had 5 hours to kill his own mother, Nicole, or she would end their relationship forever. This demand was so extreme and disturbing that it revealed the depth of Caitlin's psychological disturbance and the toxic nature of their relationship. Jonathan, faced with this impossible choice, found himself paralyzed by fear and indecision. Although he had made numerous poor choices in his life, including his predatory relationship with Caitlin, the prospect of murdering his own mother was apparently beyond even his moral boundaries. As the 5-hour deadline approached, Jonathan could not bring himself to harm the woman who had given him life and had tried to help him throughout his struggles. Caitlin wanted Jonathan to kill Nicole. When he refused, she gave him an extra hour, hoping he would change his mind. But Jonathan still didn't act. So, Caitlin decided she would kill Nicole herself. She believed that for her relationship with Jonathan to work, Nicole had to die. Despite feeling troubled and pressured, she resolved to commit the murder since Jonathan wouldn't. On the evening of April 19, 2023, Nicole Jones stood in her kitchen, facing her refrigerator. Unbeknownst to her, Caitlin was outside and had found a large rock. Caitlin brought the rock inside, intending to use it as a weapon. Nicole continued her usual evening routine, completely unaware that Caitlin was about to end her life in a shocking and violent way. Her kitchen, normally a place of comfort, was about to become the scene of a brutal crime. As Nicole stood, with her back turned, focused on whatever she was retrieving from the refrigerator, Caitlin approached from behind with the rock in her hands. In a moment of pure evil and violence, Caitlin began bludgeoning Nicole over the head with the rock, striking her multiple times with brutal force. The attack was swift and merciless, giving Nicole no opportunity to defend herself or even understand what was happening. As if the bludgeoning wasn't enough to ensure Nicole's death, Caitlin then strangled her, making certain that she would never again interfere in her relationship with Jonathan. Jonathan was in the living room when his girlfriend, Caitlin, murdered his mother in the kitchen. Instead of calling for help or trying to save her, Jonathan chose to help Caitlin hide the crime. This decision made him an accomplice in a shocking murder case. They worked together to dispose of Nicole's body. They drove to 2 local stores, purchasing a tarp and garbage bags to wrap Nicole's lifeless body. They returned to the house and wrapped Nicole's body in the materials they had purchased. After wrapping the body, Jonathan and Caitlin loaded Nicole into the trunk. In perhaps one of the most disturbing details of this case, prosecutors later revealed that Jonathan and Caitlin actually went out to dinner while Nicole's body remained in the trunk. Following their dinner, they drove to a nearby apartment complex and disposed of Nicole's body in a dumpster, treating her as mere garbage to be discarded. The dumpster was collected the following day as part of the normal garbage pickup, and Nicole's body was taken to a landfill. Even though law enforcement searched thoroughly, Nicole's body was never found. This prevents her family from having the closure they would get from a proper burial. With Nicole's body disposed of, Jonathan and Caitlin decided to flee the area to avoid prosecution. They took Nicole's 2021 Buick Encore and began driving west, eventually crossing the border into Mexico. Along with the car, they also took Nicole's social security card, identification, credit cards, and health insurance card, essentially stealing her identity along with her life. However, their escape was short-lived. Caitlin, perhaps overwhelmed by the magnitude of her actions, made a critical error that would lead to their capture. While on the run, she contacted one of her caregivers and confessed to the murder, admitting that she had killed Jonathan's mother. This confession prompted the caregiver to immediately contact law enforcement, who began working with U.S. Marshals to track down Jonathan and Caitlin. The search for Jonathan and Caitlin became an international manhunt, with law enforcement agencies on both sides of the border cooperating to locate them. Fortunately for investigators, Jonathan was still wearing the Jeep's tracking device, mandated as part of his earlier conviction. This device allowed authorities to track their movements and ultimately locate them in the municipality of Ahumada, in the state of Chihuahua, Mexico, on May 8, 2023, approximately 3 weeks after Nicole's murder. U.S. Marshals and Mexican authorities successfully apprehended both Jonathan and Caitlin. They were found in possession of Nicole's vehicle and personal documents, providing further evidence of their guilt. Jonathan and Caitlin was extradited back to the United States to face charges for their roles in Nicole's brutal murder. Before, back in Ohio, law enforcement had been conducting a thorough investigation into Nicole's disappearance and presumed death. The investigation had begun on May 5, 2023, when Canton Police contacted Sylvania Township Police requesting a welfare check on Nicole Jones. When officers arrived at her condominium, they were unable to locate her despite conducting a thorough search of the premises. As the investigation unfolded, the true horror of what had transpired became clear. Detective Jake Albright of the Sylvania Township Police Department interviewed Caitlin extensively after her arrest, and she provided detailed confessions about how she had murdered Nicole. The case against both Caitlin and Jonathan was overwhelming. In addition to Caitlin's confessions, investigators had Jeep's tracking data from Jonathan's ankle monitor that corroborated the timeline of events and their movements after the murder. Surveillance footage from the stores where they purchased supplies further supported the prosecution's case against them. Initially, prosecutors charged Caitlin with aggravated murder, abuse of a corpse, felonious assault, and tampering with evidence. Given the serious nature of the charges and the calculated manner in which the crime was committed, the court decided to charge Caitlin as an adult. Despite her being only 17 at the time of the murder, Jonathan faced even more charges, including 2 counts of aggravated murder, felonious assault, aggravated burglary, aggravated robbery, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. However, as the case moved through the legal system, both defendants ultimately decided to accept plea agreements rather than face trial. On June 4, 2024, both Caitlin Coons, now 18, and Jonathan Jones, 33, appeared in Lucas County Common Police Court before judge. They each pleaded no contest to charges of aggravated murder and abuse of a corpse. As part of the plea agreement, prosecutors agreed to dismiss the remaining charges against both defendants. The judge sentenced each of them to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. While this sentence ensures that both will spend decades behind bars, it also means that they could potentially be released while still relatively young, a thought that brings little comfort to Nicole's grieving family. During the sentencing hearing, the impact of Nicole's murder on her family became painfully clear. Nicole's brother, Robert Jones, who is the administrator of her estate, spoke about the devastating effect her loss has had on their family. Lucas County Prosecutor Julia Bates addressed the case following the sentencing, acknowledging the horror of what had transpired and expressing hope that the resolution would bring some measure of peace to Nicole's family. She said, "This was a horrific event." In her statement, they are relieved to reach a resolution in this case. They hope this brings some measure of peace to Nicole Jones's family. May her memory forever live in their hearts. As a result of this case, Robert Jones, representing Nicole's estate, has filed a civil lawsuit against Caitlin and Jonathan for wrongful death. The lawsuit seeks $25,000 in damages, in addition to punitive damages and other expenses. The suit acknowledges that no amount of money can truly make up for Nicole's death and the way it occurred. A tragic part of this case is that Nicole's body has never been found. Her family has been deprived of the fundamental right to give her a proper burial and have a place to remember and honor her. Not knowing where Nicole's remains are located intensifies their suffering. This case serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences that can result from predatory relationships and the exploitation of vulnerable individuals. Caitlin, who began as a victim of Jonathan's inappropriate pursuit when she was just 15, ultimately became a perpetrator of one of the most brutal murders imaginable. While this transformation does not excuse her actions, it highlights the complex dynamics that can develop when adults prey upon children who are already struggling with trauma and instability. The residents of Sylvania Township, especially those in Nicole's condominium complex, were deeply disturbed by the terrible crime. Many residents are elderly and had moved there because they thought it was a safe and peaceful place to live. The shocking murder of their neighbor by her son and his teenage girlfriend destroyed their feeling of safety and showed that violence can happen anywhere, even in quiet communities. As this case comes to a close with the sentencing of both perpetrators, Nicole Jones's family continues to struggle with their immense loss. It was evident to everyone that Nicole Jones was a caring mother who had tried to protect both her son and the teenage girl her son was exploiting. Her concern for their welfare ultimately cost her life as she became the victim of a crime so brutal and senseless that it continues to shock all who learn about it. Sydney Sutherland was born in Grubbs, Arkansas, to a humble, close-knit family. The youngest of 3 children, she has an extremely close relationship with her mother, Maggie. Their relationship was incredibly close. They spoke daily, shared every detail of their lives, and supported each other fully. It is this deep relationship that has helped shape Sydney's personality, making her a warm, approachable, and empathetic person. She is very good at studying, but always maintains a humble attitude and values discipline. These qualities make her trustworthy in the eyes of everyone. From a young age, Sydney showed a strong desire to help people, so her decision to pursue a career in nursing came as no surprise. After graduating from high school, she enrolled in a medical program and started working at Harris Medical Center. Not only does she provide attentive care, she also brings comfort and optimism to those around her with her very presence. Sydney also had a full and fulfilling personal life outside of work. She lived with her partner, Alex, loved her dogs, doted on her nephews and nieces, and treasured family traditions. A physically active lifestyle was important to her, as exercise helped her manage stress and stay balanced. In August 2020, she and her family had a memorable vacation in Florida, participating in activities such as swimming, hiking, and enjoying warm moments together. But no one expected that it would be the last time they would live their familiar life. Sydney returned home, feeling refreshed and ready to resume her routine. Quake Llewellyn is a lifelong resident of Jackson County. Living just a few miles from the town of Grubbs, he was born into a farming family, owned a lot of land, and was respected by the community. His family was renowned for their honesty, hard work, and had been honored with the prestigious Farm Family of the Year title in 2016. From a young age, he worked on the family farm, handling machinery, managing daily tasks, and helping during busy seasons. To others, Quake's life appeared uneventful and free of issues. He does not violate the law, does not complain, or exhibit any concerning behavior. He's quiet, keeps to himself, and does not cause any trouble. Neighbors described him as a reserved person, a loner, perhaps, who never sought attention. This lack of warning signals made him seem harmless, but it was a dangerous illusion. On a hot day in August 2020, Sydney and Quake's paths had yet to cross. Their lives moved in parallel, hers filled with connection, care, and trust, his with solitude, farming, and silence. The only thing they had in common was living in a small town where everyone thought they knew each other. No one expected their lives to intersect in such an unexpected way. August 19, 2020, began as an ordinary day. Sydney drove to Jonesboro for a gym session with her personal trainer. The workout lasted about an hour. Security cameras captured her returning home, getting out of her car, packing her things, entering the house, and leaving shortly afterwards. She appeared composed and energetic, wearing athletic gear. With no signs of fatigue, Sydney then stopped at her mother Maggie's house to drop off mail collected during the Florida trip. Their visit was brief, part of their usual daily routine. Sydney mentioned her plans for the afternoon, including baking cookies or brownies and going for a run. Her mother, concerned about the heat and the fact that Sydney had already worked out, tried to gently discourage her from running. Sydney smiled and reassured her that the run wasn't about exercise, but more of a break to clear her mind. Before parting, they exchanged loving words and said they would talk soon. Neither of them knew that those would be the last words they said to each other. Back home, cameras again captured Sydney checking her Apple Watch to track her running stats. Around 2:30 p.m., she headed out for her usual route on Highway 18 between Newport and Grubbs. It was a familiar path she often ran, passing through quiet fields and farmlands with minimal traffic. The road, with its smooth surface and lack of distractions, was ideal for running. At the same time, Quake was driving down the road in his pickup truck and saw Sydney running. She didn't look distressed or make any gestures for help. He drove past her, but then turned around, returned to her road, and began following her. He slowed down, while she continued running, completely oblivious to the danger. Without warning, Quake acted. He abruptly steered his truck towards Sydney and struck her. Later, he would admit he used his vehicle as a weapon. The impact was severe, leaving Sydney gravely injured and unable to move. After the collision, Quake stepped out of his truck, lifted Sydney's body into the truck bed, and drove away. He left the main highway and followed a dirt road leading to farmland owned by his family. Stopping in a remote, hidden area, he carried out a violent act while Sydney was in a semi-conscious state. He abandoned her there, without aid, without clothing. Following this, he decided to end her life. Then, Quake dug a shallow grave nearby on his family's property, placed Sydney's body inside, covered it with dirt, and left the scene. Returning home, he cleaned himself up, showering and changing clothes, and then hid his stained clothing in his mother's laundry hamper. He remained silent about what he had done. Giving no indication of guilt, he continued his day as if nothing had happened. He ate dinner with his family, answered phone calls, and behaved as if everything was normal. For hours, he displayed no signs of distress. No one around him suspected that he had committed such a violent crime and concealed it. That same evening, the 19th of August, Sydney didn't return home. Her partner, Alex, wasn't immediately alarmed, assuming at first she was simply delayed. The two typically stayed in contact throughout the day, but when 30 minutes passed without a response, then an hour, Alex started to worry. Her phone rang, but there was no answer, just voicemail. Sydney also wasn't responding on messaging apps, which was entirely unlike her. She was always quick to answer, even during brief pauses in daily activities like exercising. The possibility that her phone battery had died crossed Alex's mind, but as time went on, his worry deepened. He repeatedly called, sent messages, and tried to find any signs of activity, but there was nothing. Growing increasingly concerned, Alex contacted Sydney's mother, Maggie. Maggie said she had seen Sydney earlier that day and that everything had seemed fine. Sydney had mentioned going for a run, and Maggie assumed she had returned home afterwards. But when she too couldn't get in touch with Sydney, alarm set in. Together, Alex and Maggie contacted friends and family, trying to gather information, but no one had heard from her. That evening, Alex officially reported Sydney missing. He knew something was wrong. She wasn't the type to simply disappear. She always informed someone of her plans and stayed connected with those close to her. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office took the report seriously. The sheriff, who knew Sydney and her family personally, immediately dismissed the idea that she had left of her own accord. By the morning of the 20th of August, a search effort was underway. Authorities activated all possible resources, enlisting local law enforcement, state investigators, and federal agents. The search quickly grew into one of the largest in the county's history. Volunteers from the community, men, women, teenagers, and retirees joined alongside police. Some took time off work, while others arranged for neighbors to watch their children. More than 300 people gathered for the search, not wasting any time. Every minute was critical. They began with Sydney's usual jogging route, scrutinizing roadsides, ditches, and tree lines. While investigators simultaneously gathered digital data, Sydney had been wearing an Apple Watch and carried her iPhone. Details that became vital to the case. Investigators requested and quickly received geolocation data from Sydney's Apple and cell phone providers. The coordinates pointed toward a specific area between Newport and Grubbs along the highway near her reported sighting. A delivery driver later confirmed seeing Sydney running along the highway on the 19th of August. He noted that she was alone, appeared fine, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. His account matched the time and location from her device data, which helped narrow down the search area. As a result, search teams focused their efforts there. On the morning of the 20th of August, a group of volunteers found Sydney's iPhone lying in the grass near her home. The phone was undamaged, but appeared to have been deliberately thrown there rather than dropped accidentally. A forensic examination later confirmed that the phone had been moved, marking a major turning point in the case. Sydney's disappearance was no longer seen as routine. Instead, it became a potential criminal investigation. Investigators began questioning anyone who had been in the area around the time Sydney disappeared. Among those interviewed was Quake Llewellyn, who voluntarily came to the station. He claimed to have seen Sydney that day and expressed his willingness to help. According to him, she was running alone and appeared fine. He insisted he hadn't noticed anything unusual and cooperated fully, even allowing investigators to inspect his truck. During the inspection of the truck bed, officers discovered traces of blood, an inconsistency in Quake's account. Up to that point, he had made no mention of any physical contact with Sydney. This discovery has changed the direction of the investigation, as the car is now regarded as a critical piece of evidence in the case. Investigators then reviewed Quake's digital footprint, including location data from his phone on the day Sydney vanished. His phone movements closely matched hers, aligning with her path nearly minute by minute. This overlap was no coincidence. Additional evidence was revealed through security camera footage on Quake's family farm. The footage showed his truck leaving the property and returning later with the bed covered by a tarp. Beneath the tarp was a large, distinct shape that hadn't been there earlier. This directly contradicted Quake's account and heightened investigators' suspicions. Faced with mounting evidence, Quake began to buckle under pressure. Initially, he continued denying involvement, but he eventually admitted that there had been an accident. He claimed he unintentionally hit Sydney due to poor visibility and dusty road conditions. Panicked, he placed her body in the bed of his truck and drove away instead of calling for help. He described his actions as driven by fear and confusion. However, as investigators pressed for more details, his story evolved. He admitted to removing Sydney's clothing, hiding her body, and burying her to conceal the incident. He also confessed to discarding the clothing he had worn during the crime in a laundry hamper at his mother's house. These actions were no longer consistent with panic. They were deliberate attempts to conceal evidence. A search of Quake's mother's house uncovered critical evidence: a black shirt and shorts belonging to him. Forensic tests later revealed that Sydney's hair and DNA were on these items, directly connecting him to the crime. The case against Quake grew stronger, with witness statements, blood evidence, GPS data, and surveillance footage forming a damning chain of incriminating evidence. Armed with this evidence, investigators brought Quake in for further questioning. They confronted him with the incidents, location data from his phone, surveillance footage from his family farm, the blood found in his truck, and the clothing he had tried to hide. His initial account of a tragic accident became less convincing. Under pressure, he contradicted himself, and when directly asked what he did after hitting Sydney, he admitted to taking her body to a secluded field owned by his family. There, he committed further acts of assault. When asked if Sydney had still been alive at the time, he avoided giving a clear answer. Quake described the incident as happening quickly and feeling like a blur. He admitted that he had buried Sydney in a shallow grave, convinced that no one would search there. He revealed that he had chosen the location beforehand and was familiar with the area. Afterward, he returned home, discarded his clothes into a laundry basket, showered, and ate dinner as though it were just another day. He remained unsettlingly calm. On August 21, 2020, 3 days after Sydney's disappearance, the search came to a tragic conclusion. Law enforcement and investigators followed Quake's directions to a secluded field owned by his family, far from main roads and difficult to access without knowing the land well. At the exact spot Quake indicated, officers found freshly disturbed soil. When they dug beneath the surface, they discovered her body. Forensic experts started processing the scene. The grave was shallow, with no effort to hide it permanently. Her body was found in a twisted position, partially covered by clothing that Quake either forgot or chose not to remove. Everything he had confessed matched the evidence. Before investigators, forensic analysis determined that Sydney had sustained multiple injuries. Some showed signs of a struggle, but her primary cause of death was blunt force trauma inflicted with significant force from hands and feet. Her death hadn't been immediate. Before she died, Sydney endured violent acts. Medical examiners confirmed the crime unfolded in stages. First, she was injured after being hit by a vehicle. Then, she was placed into a truck, transported, and assaulted. Finally, she was fatally beaten. Immediately after recovering her body, police arrested Quake Llewellyn. Quake was charged with first-degree murder, assault, kidnapping, and desecration of a body. The charges were supported by overwhelming evidence, including his confession, forensic findings, and witness testimony. For Sydney's family, the worst fears were realized. The hope they clung to during the early days of her disappearance was gone. Sydney's body was found buried not far from where she had grown up. The news of her death devastated her family and the entire community of grubs, volunteers, healthcare workers, and teachers who had searched tirelessly for her were deeply affected. The most painful revelation was that the person responsible had been among them all along, pretending to help while knowing the truth. After his arrest, Quake showed no remorse. He neither spoke out, apologized, nor offered any explanation for his actions. His demeanor was calm and detached. The officers who transported him noticed no signs of confusion or anxiety. He did not attempt to justify his actions or withdraw his confession. Quake confirmed all details of the crime without showing any emotion. Investigators completed their work, building a thorough timeline from the moment Sydney left for her run to the final ping from her Apple Watch and the discovery of her body. Every step of the sequence was verified. Even without Quake's confession, the evidence was strong enough to secure a solid case. Once the investigation was finished, Quake's case was transferred to the Jackson County District Court. His defense team knew a jury would likely find him guilty, which could result in the death penalty. In response, the defense filed a motion for a psychiatric evaluation. The evaluation took several months, and by February 2021, it was determined that Quake was competent to stand trial. He understood his actions and their consequences. The examining psychiatrist concluded that he did not suffer from any severe mental disorders. His emotional detachment was noted, but not classified as a psychological condition. He showed no remorse or sympathy for Sydney's family. The prosecution offered him a plea deal. If Quake admitted guilt, the death penalty would be taken off the table. This offer was discussed extensively with Sydney's family, who did not want a prolonged trial, repeated testimonies, or the public scrutiny of every detail of the crime. Although the decision was heart-wrenching, they agreed to accept a life sentence without the possibility of parole. On October 1, 2021, Quake Llewellyn pled guilty to the crime and assault. As part of the plea agreement, 2 additional charges were dropped. Sydney's parents and close family members were present in the courtroom. In the part of her speech about the impact of the incident, Sydney's mother directly addressed Quake and asked him to look her straight in the eyes. She told him he had no right to take her daughter from her. Her voice trembled, but her message was unwavering. Sydney's father also spoke. He called Quake a coward and stressed that Quake's actions were deliberate. The family did not focus on revenge, but on justice. Although they spoke without anger, their words conveyed the depth of their loss. Sydney's story is a sobering reminder that danger can sometimes hide behind the face of someone who seems completely ordinary. This is the story of Gypsy Rose Blanchard, who first met Nicholas Goujon when she was just 20 years old. In 2012, while her mother, Claudine Blanchard, was asleep, Gypsy Rose would secretly use the family computer to connect with the outside world, a world her mother had kept her isolated from for most of her life. It was during one of these late-night sessions that Gypsy discovered a Christian singles website. She created a profile, hoping to find companionship and perhaps escape her suffocating existence. Nicolas Goujon, a 23-year-old man from Big Bend, Wisconsin, was also searching for connection when he came across Gypsy's profile. What started as innocent conversations about their shared faith quickly blossomed into something deeper. Nicholas couldn't help but be drawn to Gypsy's sweet demeanor and seemingly childlike voice, though he had no idea of the dark reality behind her innocent online persona. As time passed, Gypsy and Nicholas continued to text and talk online daily. Their conversations became the highlight of Gypsy's otherwise controlled and restricted life. What made Nicholas particularly appealing to Gypsy was his acceptance of her supposed medical conditions. Gypsy had grown up believing she was severely ill with leukemia, muscular dystrophy, epilepsy, and numerous other ailments that her mother claimed required constant medical attention and care. Gypsy loved that she found solace in their shared conversations about faith and the future they might have together. On the surface, Gypsy and Dee Dee seemed like a loving mother and daughter dealing with severe health issues. But this was a false image. He had a mental illness called Munchausen syndrome by proxy, now known as factitious disorder, imposed on another. This condition led her to falsely claim exaggerate, or even cause illnesses in Gypsy. Starting when Gypsy was only 3 months old, Dee Dee tricked doctors into believing her daughter was seriously sick, resulting in many needless medical tests, operations, and therapies for Gypsy. Gypsy's father, Rodney Blanchard, had separated from Dee Dee shortly before Gypsy's birth on July 27, 1991. Rodney realized that he had gotten married for the wrong reasons and couldn't continue the relationship. When he refused to return to Dee Dee, she took their newborn daughter and moved back to Louisiana to live with her family. Rodney continued to pay child support of $1,200 monthly and occasionally spoke with Gypsy on the phone. Though Dee Dee strictly controlled these conversations, During one call on Gypsy's 18th birthday, Rodney recalls Dee Dee telling him not to mention her daughter's real age. Since Dee Dee thought Gypsy was 14, as Gypsy grew older, Dee Dee's control over her daughter became increasingly suffocating. She shaved Gypsy's head regularly to maintain the appearance of chemotherapy treatments, forced her to use a wheelchair despite her ability to walk, and inserted a feeding tube that was medically unnecessary. Gypsy underwent numerous painful and invasive procedures, including eye surgeries and the removal of her salivary glands. He would use topical anesthetics to cause drooling, convincing doctors that the salivary gland removal was necessary. The elaborate deception continued for years, with Dee Dee becoming increasingly skilled at doctor shopping, changing medical providers whenever anyone began to question Gypsy's mysterious ailments. After Hurricane Katrina in 2005, Dee Dee and Gypsy moved to Missouri. First to Aurora, Missouri, and later to Springfield, Missouri, where their deception reached new heights. The community embraced them wholeheartedly, with local organizations providing extensive support. Habitat for Humanity built them a specially designed pink house with wheelchair ramps and accessibility features. The Make-A-Wish Foundation arranged trips to Disney World and backstage passes to Miranda Lambert concerts, where Gypsy was frequently photographed with the country music star. As Gypsy entered her teenage years, she began to question her mother's explanations about her health. She couldn't help but notice that she felt perfectly capable of walking and functioning normally when her mother wasn't watching. Her curiosity about the outside world grew, and she began to suspect that something wasn't right about her situation. During secret late-night computer sessions, Gypsy began exploring dating websites and social media, desperate for connection with people her own age. It was during this time that Gypsy created multiple Facebook accounts under different names, where she reportedly liked pictures of adult content, demonstrating her growing awareness of her gender and desire for independence. When Gypsy first met Nicholas in person in March 2015, it was a revelation for both of them. Nicholas traveled from Wisconsin to Missouri to see her, with whom he had been chatting online for nearly 3 years. For Gypsy, this meeting represented everything she had been denied: companionship, romance, and the possibility of a normal relationship. For Nicholas, who struggled with autism spectrum disorder and had a history of mental health issues, Gypsy represented acceptance and love. Their relationship quickly became physical, and Gypsy experienced intimacy for the first time in her life. She couldn't help but feel that Nicholas was her ticket to freedom from her mother's oppressive control. However, their secret meetings had to be carefully orchestrated, as Dee maintained strict surveillance over her daughter's activities. When Dee discovered that Gypsy was spending time communicating with a young man online, she became increasingly jealous and possessive. As their online relationship deepened, Gypsy and Nicholas began to discuss their fantasies about being together permanently. They chose names for potential children and talked about eloping, dreams that seemed impossible given Gypsy's supposed medical conditions and her mother's constant supervision. Nicholas, blindly in love with Gypsy, began to develop alternate personalities that he referenced in their conversations, including what he called his evil side that enjoyed killing. Gypsy also adopted a darker persona she called Ruby during their more intense exchanges. The relationship took a disturbing turn when Gypsy's desperation to escape her mother's control began to manifest in increasingly violent fantasies. During one particularly upsetting incident at a movie theater, when Dee became angry that Gypsy was acting too old for her supposed age and physical condition, Gypsy felt her anger and helplessness reach a breaking point. She couldn't just jump out of the wheelchair because she was afraid and didn't know what her mother would do. She had no one to trust. It was after this incident that Gypsy's thoughts turned to the darkest possible solution. She couldn't help but wonder if the only way to escape her mother's control was through death, either her own or her mother's. When she posed the question to Nicholas during one of their late-night conversations, asking, "Would you kill my mother for me?" she was testing the depths of his devotion. Nicholas, so in love with Gypsy and so obsessed with her that he would do anything for her. Agreed quite easily, they began to plan what they called Plan B, the murder of Dee Blanchard. Their text messages during this period became increasingly focused on the logistics of the crime, discussing the need for duct tape, knives, and gloves. Nicholas spoke of his evil side, while Gypsy embraced her darker persona, Ruby. As they planned the unthinkable, as the early months of 2015 passed, Gypsy's desperation to escape her mother's control grew exponentially. Dee had become increasingly suspicious of her daughter's online activities and had tightened her surveillance even further. She physically chained Gypsy to the bed at times and put bells on the doors to alert her if Gypsy tried to move around the house, unsupervised. Dee told anyone who would listen that Gypsy was probably going through a phase and asked them to inform her if they noticed Gypsy doing anything behind her back. The isolation was becoming unbearable for Gypsy, who was now in her early 22nd, but still being treated like a young child with severe disabilities. She feels that her entire life was a lie, and her mother's control was becoming more physically abusive as Gypsy showed signs of rebellion. During this time, Gypsy's relationship with Nicholas provided the only escape from her suffocating reality, and their conversations became increasingly focused on finding a permanent solution to her situation. Nicholas, who had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and had an IQ on the lower side of average, was completely devoted to Gypsy and believed that helping her escape her mother's abuse was an act of love and protection. His own troubled past, including a previous arrest for indecent exposure, made him feel like an outsider who had finally found acceptance and purpose through his relationship with Gypsy. As their plans became more concrete, Gypsy sent Nicholas money in the mail so he could purchase a bus ticket to travel from Wisconsin to Missouri. They had decided that the murder would take place in June 2015, when Nicholas could visit and carry out their plan. Gypsy's unease grew as she contemplated the reality of what they were planning. But she remained steadfast in her belief that this was the only way she could ever be free from her mother's oppressive control. In the days leading up to the 9th of June, 2015, the tension in the Blanchard household was palpable. She had no idea that her daughter was planning her death. She continued to maintain strict control over every aspect of Gypsy's life. The two had recently returned from yet another medical appointment where Gypsy had to undergo the replacement of her feeding tube, another unnecessary medical procedure that served to maintain the illusion of her severe illness. On the evening of June 10, 2015, Nicholas arrived in Springfield and made his way to the Blanchard house. Gypsy had left the front door unlocked for him, and she provided him with gloves, duct tape, and a large, serrated knife. Her heart was pounding as she retreated to the bathroom, covering her ears so she wouldn't hear her mother's screams. She remained in the bathroom during the entire attack, knowing that Nicholas was carrying out the violent act that would finally free her from her mother's control. Just a few minutes ago, Dee lay sleeping peacefully, unaware that her life was about to end. Nicholas stabbed her 17 times in the back while she slept, ensuring that she would never wake up. The attack was brutal and merciless, carried out by a young man who believed he was saving the woman he loved from a lifetime of abuse and imprisonment. Following the murder, Gypsy and Nicholas stole more than $4,400 in cash that Dee had been keeping in the house, mostly from Rodney's monthly child support payments. They carefully mailed the murder weapon back to Nicholas's home in Wisconsin to avoid being caught with evidence of the crime. They then fled to a motel outside Springfield, where they stayed for several days before purchasing bus tickets to Wisconsin. Several witnesses who saw they on their way to the bus station noted that Gypsy wore a blonde wig and walked unassisted. A shocking sight for anyone who had known her as a wheelchair-bound invalid. For the first time in her life, Gypsy was walking freely in public. Everyone who knew the Blanchard family knew something was terribly wrong when disturbing posts began appearing on Dee Dee's Facebook page. On June 14th, 2015, friends and neighbors were shocked to see a post on the Dee Dee Facebook page. The language was completely out of character for the devoted mother they thought they knew, and multiple people immediately tried calling the house to check on the family. When phone calls went unanswered for several hours, concerned friends and neighbors gathered at the Blanchard home. They noticed that Dee Dee's specially modified car was still in the driveway, making it unlikely that the pair had left on one of their frequent medical trips. The protective film on the windows made it difficult to see inside the house, and no one answered when they knocked on the door. Filled with concern for both Dee Dee and Gypsy's safety, the gathered friends called 911 to request a welfare check. When police arrived at the scene, they had to wait for a search warrant to be issued before they could legally enter the home. However, they allowed a neighbor to climb through a window to gain access. The discovery inside the Blanchard home was horrifying beyond imagination. His body was found in her bedroom, lying face down in a pool of blood. The scene was gruesome, with evidence of a violent attack scattered throughout the room. What made the discovery even more shocking was the absence of Gypsy. Her wheelchair was left behind. The community had always known Gypsy as a severely disabled young woman who could not walk or care for herself. Therefore, her disappearance raised immediate concerns that she had been kidnapped by whoever had murdered her mother. Crime scene investigators arrived quickly to begin their meticulous examination. They carefully documented every piece of evidence, taking photographs and collecting samples that might provide insight into the horrible, final moments of Dee Dee's life. The investigation revealed the brutal nature of the attack, with blood spatter patterns indicating that the victim had been stabbed multiple times while she slept. As investigators continued their work, they began to trace the disturbing Facebook posts that had first alerted the community to the tragedy. Using advanced technology, they were able to track the IP address from which the posts had been made, leading them to an address in Big Bend, Wisconsin. This breakthrough would prove crucial in solving the case and uncovering the truth about what had really happened to the Blanchard family. Law enforcement officers in Missouri immediately contacted their counterparts in Wisconsin. On June 15, 2015, police agencies in Waukesha County prepared to raid the Nicholas Godejohn's home. The investigation was moving quickly, but no one yet understood the complex web of deception and abuse that had led to this shocking crime. Meanwhile, a vigil was held in Springfield for both Dee Dee and Gypsy, as community members still believed that Gypsy was a victim who had been kidnapped. The outpouring of support was tremendous, with hundreds of people gathering to pray for the safe return of the young woman they had all come to know and love as a brave fighter battling multiple serious illnesses. When Wisconsin law enforcement officers arrived at the Godejohn home in Big Bend, they were surprised to find both Nicholas and Gypsy there, alive and unharmed. Even more shocking was the fact that Gypsy was walking normally and appeared to be in perfect health, a stark contrast to the wheelchair-bound, oxygen-dependent young woman the community had known for years. Both Nicholas and Gypsy surrendered peacefully to authorities. They were taken into custody, charged with first-degree murder and felony armed criminal action. The news that Gypsy was safe was initially greeted with relief in Springfield, but that relief quickly turned to confusion and horror as the truth about the Blanchard family began to emerge. During their initial questioning, both Nicholas and Gypsy confessed to their roles in Dee Dee's murder. Nicholas admitted that he had stabbed Dee Dee to death and said he had only done it because Gypsy had asked him to. Gypsy, meanwhile, acknowledged that she had been in the house during the murder, had provided Nicholas with the weapon, and had done nothing to stop the attack. Medical examinations revealed that Gypsy was perfectly healthy, and had never suffered from any of the serious illnesses her mother had claimed plagued her throughout her life. The realization that the entire community had been deceived for years sent shockwaves through Springfield and beyond. In announcing the arrests, Greene County Sheriff warned the public that things are not always as they appear. This understated comment would prove to be one of the most significant understatements in criminal justice history, as the full scope of Dee Dee's deception and Gypsy's victimization began to come to light. Medical records and expert testimony revealed that Dee Dee had been systematically abusing her daughter through unnecessary medical treatments and procedures for more than 2 decades. Gypsy had undergone countless surgeries, including eye procedures, the removal of her salivary glands, and the insertion of feeding tubes, all based on her mother's false claims about her health conditions. The investigation revealed that Dee Dee had used various methods to maintain the illusion of her daughter's illness. She regularly shaved Gypsy's head to simulate the effects of chemotherapy treatments and forced her daughter to use a wheelchair despite her ability to walk normally. Expert witnesses explained that Dee Dee suffered from Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a rare mental health disorder where a caregiver fabricates or induces illness in someone under their care to gain attention, sympathy, and often financial benefits. The diagnosis helped explain how Dee Dee had been able to deceive doctors, community members, and even her own family for so many years. As the case moved through the legal system, prosecutors faced the complex challenge of determining appropriate charges for both defendants. While Nicholas had clearly committed the physical act of murder, Gypsy's role as both victim and accomplice created unprecedented legal and ethical questions about justice and accountability. The prosecutor announced that he would not seek the death penalty for either defendant, calling the case extraordinary and unusual. The decision reflected the unique circumstances surrounding the crime and the recognition that Gypsy had been a victim of severe abuse throughout her entire life. Gypsy's defense attorney, Michael Stanfield, worked tirelessly to secure a favorable plea agreement for his client. After obtaining Gypsy's medical records and documenting the extensive abuse she had suffered, Stanfield was able to negotiate a plea deal that took into account her status as a long-term victim of child abuse and medical maltreatment. On the 5th of July, 2016, Gypsy Rose Blanchard appeared in court to enter her plea. When asked how she pleaded to the charge of second-degree murder, she responded clearly, "Guilty." The plea agreement resulted in a sentence of 10 years in prison, the minimum sentence possible for second-degree murder under Missouri law. Unlike Gypsy, who accepted a plea agreement, Nicholas chose to go to trial, hoping for a sentence more aligned with the 10 years that Gypsy had received. His defense attorneys argued that he had diminished capacity due to his autism spectrum disorder and that he had been manipulated by Gypsy into committing the murder during the trial, which took place in November 2018. Prosecutors presented evidence of Gypsy and Nicholas's text message exchanges, which showed detailed planning of the murder over several months. The messages revealed Nicholas's references to his evil side and his willingness to kill for Gypsy, whom he claimed to love deeply. Gypsy took the stand during Nicholas's trial and testified about her role in planning the murder. She admitted to the court that she had talked him into it, acknowledging her part in convincing Nicholas to kill her mother. Her testimony was crucial in establishing the premeditated nature of the crime and Nicholas's understanding of what he was being asked to do. Nicholas's attorneys argued that their client was so in love with Gypsy and so obsessed with her that he would do anything she asked, even commit murder. They contended that his autism made him more susceptible to manipulation and that he lacked the mental capabilities required for true premeditation. After deliberating the evidence and testimony, the jury found Nicholas John guilty of first-degree murder. The conviction carried the possibility of life in prison without parole, which is exactly what the judge imposed. In addition to the life sentence, Nicholas received an additional 25 years for armed criminal action. During his sentencing hearing in February 2019, Nicholas addressed the court and reiterated that he had murdered Dee Dee Blanchard because he wanted to help free Gypsy from her abusive situation. His words reflected the complicated emotions and motivations that had driven him to commit such a violent act in the name of love and protection. The contrast between Gypsy's 10-year sentence and Nicholas's life sentence highlighted the court's recognition of the different roles each defendant had played in the crime. While both were held accountable for their actions, the legal system acknowledged that Gypsy's lifelong victimization and abuse were significant mitigating factors that warranted a more lenient sentence. Gypsy began serving her sentence at the Chillicothe Correctional Center in Missouri, where she would spend the next 8 years. For the first time since early childhood, she was living independently, making her own decisions about her daily activities, medical care, and personal relationships. During her incarceration, Gypsy focused on education and personal growth. She worked to understand the complex psychological dynamics that had defined her relationship with her mother and to develop the life skills she had never been allowed to learn. The restrictive prison environment, ironically, offered her more freedom and autonomy than she had ever experienced under her mother's care. In July 2022, Gypsy married Ryan Anderson, a teacher from Louisiana, in a prison ceremony without any guests present. The marriage represented a new chapter and her continued efforts to build healthy relationships. On December 28, 2023, after serving 8 years of her 10-year sentence, Gypsy was released from prison on parole. She walked out of the Chillicothe Correctional Center at 3:30 a.m., finally experiencing true freedom for the first time in her 32 years. Her release generated enormous media attention and public interest, with millions following her story through documentaries, television series, and social media. Gypsy embraced her newfound fame and freedom, quickly amassing nearly 10 million followers across various social media platforms where she documented her life after prison. In interviews following her release, Gypsy expressed deep regret about her mother's death while also acknowledging the abuse she had suffered. She didn't deserve that, Gypsy said of her mother. She was a sick woman, and unfortunately, I wasn't educated enough to see that she deserved to be where I am now, sitting in prison, paying for her criminal behavior. In 2024, Gypsy and Ryan split up as Gypsy continues to grapple with the complexities of adult relationships, a challenge made even greater by her unique and traumatic upbringing. Today, Gypsy is in a relationship with Ken Urker, whom she originally met through a pen pal program while in prison. On December 28, 2024, exactly 1 year after her release from prison, Gypsy gave birth to a daughter. The birth of her child represents hope for a new generation and Gypsy's opportunity to break the cycle of abuse that defined her own childhood. Her unease about discussing her past has grown as she contemplates how she will one day explain to her daughter the circumstances that led to her grandmother's death and her own imprisonment. However, Gypsy remains determined to provide her child with the healthy, honest upbringing that she herself was denied. With a heavy heart, we remember as a woman who suffered from severe mental illness that drove her to harm the child she was supposed to protect. At the same time, we acknowledge Gypsy as both a victim and a survivor who made terrible choices in her desperate attempt to escape an impossible situation. The story continues to unfold as Gypsy navigates her new life as a free woman, mother, and public figure. Her journey from victim to survivor to convicted criminal and finally to free citizen represents one of the most complex and compelling true crime stories of our time.